I have a lamp now. Day 9. Actually, I think I'm going the wrong way. uh, okay. Day 9. 7 colibri on the fogometer. Absolutely no question of going for a walk, still tinkering with the aurograph. Proceeded to check the fog's sulfidic density, took another tiny sample with the suction pump and transferred it to the double helix. I attached the linden hoop theodolite and naturally forgot, yet again, to amoebize the connections first. The result, 2 hours hard work cleaning them with a micro pincers and purgative brush, likewise a volley of self-directed oaths. Marmaduke watched me in astonishment from inside his flask, his tiny lips mouthing my imprecations. I took a reading at last. The result amazed me. No, it was impossible. No water vapor could display such a high sulfidic density. Another reading, another identical result. Nonsense. I shouldn't have taken a reading without prior amoebization. Cleaning with a brush affords no guarantee. I may have measured some microbe or bacterium instead of the fog molecule. Resolved to repeat the whole procedure tomorrow, Nightingale was right when he told me I would some day put on my shoes before my socks. I'm always too impetuous when I'm experimenting. I wrote a brief memorandum from Gralsund University on the disastrous effects of overpopulation by demon bugs, Leptonotarsa demonesis, on the agricultural economy of Harvest Home Plain. Then, on the grocer's recommendation, I went to a trombophone concert in Merkholm's municipal gardens. It was sparsely attended by some asthmatic demi-dwarfs from the Yempic Alps who coughed incessantly. The 12-piece orchestra, composed entirely of Merkholmers, launched into its program trombophone music, which resembles a succession of soft, liquid plops, had a soothing effect on me. The glissandi seemed to issue from the trombophone bells like soap bubbles that lost themselves in the fog overhead. I almost got the impression that the fog was responding to the music. At many points above the orchestra it became denser, billowing and swirling around in a way that conveyed rapture but was, of course, occasioned by the wind conditions. The trombophone players' professionalism was extraordinary. Each of them improvised a brief but very original solo that taught me that what subtle cadences can be achieved by the mere lengthening and shortening of acoustic frequencies coupled with skillful manipulation of trombophone's valves. I strode home feeling exhilarated, and because of the poor visibility, tripped over a dustbin full of dead jellyfish. Day 10. At least 10 colibri on the Ostophanic fogometer. I could scarcely see the chart after all. The greasy vapor was lapping against the lighthouse in a positively menacing way, so dense at places that it clung to the window panes like a wet sponge. For the first time since my arrival, I felt a pang of uneasiness. I plucked up my courage at last and went out into the fog. It was like walking under water. Every step required an immense muscular effort. Breathing was difficult, and my gums were soon covered with an unappetizing film of salt. I felt constricted, mentally as well as physically. Do people really come here to convalesce? What terrible diseases they must be suffering from! I decided to turn back, but I lost my bearings. I wandered around like a fool for at least an hour, before, purely by chance, I blundered into my own front door, immensely relieved when I shut it behind me. I immersed myself in work. In the evening, a thorough examination of the laden mannikin in his flask. The worm-like wisp of fog was clinging to the cork like a spider. Well out of the reach of Marmaduke, who had either forgotten or was ignoring its presence, I tapped on the glass and he tapped back, comical. Read some more of Mythmaker's diary in bed. It was so exciting I sat up half the night. Day 11. 9 colibri. The dense fog persists. I took another sulfidic reading, this time with the connections duly amoebized. The result? The same as yesterday. Incredible! The fog's sulfidic density is roughly that of a living creature, and there's no doubt about it this reading is accurate. Not that I hadn't entertained such a possibility. The fog's behavior is striking enough. It's an astonishing result even so. I have, for instance, obtained a similar sulfidic density reading in the case of a jellyfish. The calibration is almost complete. In the evening I tried to take my mind off things by reading the monosematization of polysmant in Grail-Sunday cave literature, as stimulating as dried cod. I considered the study of comparative literature as a thoroughly imprecise discipline. Strange, the fog, which I at first thought so conducive to work, is beginning to depress me. It irritates me to see how it creeps around the lighthouse, trying to seep through every nook and cranny. Day 12. Only 6 colibri on the fogometer today, a relief. A long early morning walk in the municipal gardens. Merkholmers glided past as if towed through the ground mist on strings. None of them returned my salutations. I really can't fathom why so many people come here on vacation. Well, I suppose it's inexpensive. Midday came. The aerograph was ready at last. Having devoted the rest of the morning to completing the calibration, I was able to coat the orographic plate with radium powder, an extremely dangerous proceeding, so I donned my protective mask and my lead gloves and apron. That done, I positioned the labyrinthine test tube in front of the orograph and carried out some final adjustments. Then came the exposure itself. Whoosh! The orographic glow lit up my laboratory as bright as day. Marmaduke was so startled he toppled over backwards into his nutrient fluid. A magical moment despite its purely scientific nature. Now I must wait several days for the auragram to develop. Relaxation has set in. Smike skipped a couple of pages. Colibri had filled them with scientific conjectures of all kinds. His forebrain seemed to have taken advantage of the enforced delay to enlarge a wide variety of subjects. Much of the text consisted of mathematical equations and chemical symbols. Then the diary finally resumed. Day 14. Have now been here for 2 weeks. I went into town to do some shopping. On my way across the dunes, I encountered 3 Merkholmers walking towards the sea. This was odd because the locals tend to keep clear of it. Why exactly? I followed them at a distance, and they reached the shore. They were engulfed by a dense swath of fog. By the time it dispersed, they had vanished. On the way back into town, I had the nonsensical feeling that the fog was following me. It billowed and swirled about me as never before, and for the first time I thought I detected a sound issuing from it, a persistent slithering sound accompanied by the kind of exhalation I associate with the last gasp of a stranded fish. It was probably just the wind, which was also responsible, I'm sure, for the fog's unusual behavior. For all that, my sense of uneasiness mounted with every step I took, just as the fog's persistence seemed to increase. Thin wisps like cotton wool palpated my head and seemed to be trying to insinuate themselves into my auditory canals. Uttering unintelligible whispers and moist hisses, I flapped my hands in an attempt to shoo them away like troublesome insects, but to no avail. When I finally reached the grocer's shop, it was shut. This was doubly annoying because I'd suddenly, for no discernible reason, developed a burning desire to purchase a packet of sulfur, some copper sulfate, 7 meters of wire, and a coffin. Day 15. 5 colibri. Examined the aurograph. The auragram seems to be a success. No photo streaks, and the emulsion is bubble-free. Still no definite results. The developing process is painfully slow. Observed a curious meteorological phenomenon during the night. A vast thunderstorm raged above the city for hours. Incessant peals of thunder, flashes of lightning dissected into scattered explosions of light by the fog, but strangely enough, not a drop of rain or a breath of wind. Only one logical explanation. The fog encloses the city like a protective shell that absorbs the wind and rain. Day 16. The storm has failed to disperse the fog, but still the fogometer registered only 2 colibri. I could actually detect a glimmer of sunlight. Examined the auragram. Yes, it's coming on. Definite aural manifestations and the emulsion of drying steadily. Results will soon become visible. I took advantage of the fog's low density to go for a long walk. The wart-like character of Markholm's architecture is even more apparent in this visibility. It's malignant somehow like the disease of the earth's crust. Only a few public buildings and hotels or grocer's shop are constructed in the traditional manner, with rectangular walls and windows. I can't help feeling that these are exclusively intended for visitors to the city. The fog returned as suddenly as it had dispersed. Strong gusts of wind from the sea sent coils of vapor writhing through the streets, engulfing buildings and passers-by. Sensing once more that the fog was closing in on me, I set off for home in a hurry. I don't know why, but I was in an excitable mood when I finally shut the lighthouse door behind me. My eye fell on Marmaduke. He was rummaging around in his flask as he usually did when I returned home. I went over to the laden mannikin and tapped on his glass of bode. Apparently pleased that someone was taking notice of him, he hopped up and down until I tilted the flask and made him fall over backwards into his nutrient fluid. I couldn't help laughing at this. When he had laboriously scrambled to his feet, I tilted the flask so that he fell head over heels. That I found even funnier. Next, I held up the flask and proceeded to shake it. Marmaduke staggered around inside it with the fluid splashing him all over. In a frenzy now, I pranced across the laboratory, shaking the flask above my head and giggling like a naughty child. Meanwhile, poor little Marmaduke was being hurled against the walls of his glass prison. At long last I recovered my wits. Marmaduke was floating in the liquid, semi-conscious, trying to keep his head above the surface. I felt thoroughly ashamed of myself, and cannot even now account for my strange behavior. The mannikin recovered in the course of the evening, and eventually resumed his seat in the flask, impassively as if nothing had happened, but my fog sample had disappeared, probably emulsified with the nutrient fluid by all that shaking. I'd behaved like a raving lunatic, not a scientist. My sense of shame pursued me into my dreams. Smike was growing somewhat uncomfortable. This stuff was all rather personal. He felt as if he were spying on Professor Cullibree's activities like the intrusive fog that plastered itself to the lighthouse windows, but by now he couldn't have stopped reading. It was like an addiction. Day 17. 6 Colibri. Spent half the day lamenting my behavior yesterday. I'm in need of company again. The solitude of this lighthouse is having a disruptive effect on my psyche. I decided to take a day off, leave the auragram to develop by itself, and go for a long walk. My afternoon reading. Mythmaker's collected poems. Poetry is completely wasted on me, I fear. It couldn't be a more unscientific mode of expression if it tried. Those perpetual obscurities, those verbal gymnastics, those preposterous metaphors. Why not call a spade a spade? In the evening I ventured out into society for the first time since my arrival in Merkholm. I dined at the Foghorn, Merkholm's only restaurant. 4 locals were seated at separate tables, eating in silence. The waiter glided through the ground mist with the Merkholmer's usual fixed stare. Against one wall stood a big cast-iron grandfather clock whose obtrusive ticking reminded me of the inexorably transitory nature of all existence. There was only one dish, some steamed fish I'd never come across before, referred to on the menu as fogfish. It was completely transparent. One could see the subdued glow of its internal organs, which clearly indicated that it was still alive. Garnishing it were some tiny eels that had been suffocated by smoke. Well, I'm not fastidious. Contrary to my expectations, it tasted quite good. I was less enamored of the waiter, whose piercing stares throughout the meal suggested that he was trying to burn a hole into my skull. While walking home through the billowing fog, I encountered the grocer. I bade him a courteous good night, but he glided past without a word. Perhaps it wasn't him at all. They all look so alike here. Day 18. 5 colibri. Something I've noticed when observing fog. When a fog bank drifts toward an object, a tree for instance, its outlines begin to blur, losing their clarity and color. Then the tree seems to dissolve into the fog, leaf by leaf, branch by branch, until it disappears completely or until it turns into a fog. That, of course, is childish and thoroughly unscientific way of looking at the matter. The tree remains where it is. It's merely hidden from view. Why am I writing this regardless? No idea. The laden mannikin is behaving oddly. He has exchanged his lethargy for hectic activity. Either he wades around in the nutrient fluid, muttering silently to himself, or he rollicks around it like a child in a swimming pool. There are times when he bangs his head against the glass for hours, creating an irritatingly monotonous din. The auragram will be ready tomorrow, or at least everything points in that direction. Day 19. It's incredible. I could weep. When I went downstairs this morning, brimming with expectancy, to examine the auragram, I saw to my horror that the emulsion had been disturbed. It seems impossible, but someone must have broken in during the night and blurred the auragram deliberately. All that work in vain. Either I leave here empty-handed, or I must start all over again. Too disheartened to write any more. Day 20. Spent the morning setting up a new shot. Be darned if I leave here empty-handed. Took a new auragram in the afternoon. More waiting. Day 21. 5 colibris on the fogometer. Enjoyed doing nothing today. an entirely new side of me, like so many in recent days. I spent a long time looking at myself in the huge mirror that used to reflect the lantern light afar. Its convex conformation expanded my girth in a comical way that sent me into fits of laughter. It was some 3 hours before I recovered my composure. Something is changing me. I feel as if I'm passing through a very fine sieve that filters out my less admirable characteristics. The residue will be a new and better person. Day 22. For Colibri, the laden mannequin's behavior is becoming more and more peculiar. He's endeavoring to build something with the liquid nutrient. It trickles through his little fingers time after time, but that doesn't deter him from trying again and again to stack one handful on top of another. Solitude is Insanity's favorite playmate, I think was Huzek Fano who wrote that. Or was it Oscar van Trippelstock? Day 23. After much thought, I've come to the conclusion that only Marmaduke could have spoiled that auragram. He's conspiring against me, but with whom? Who lets him out of his flask? I, myself? Day 24. If flatness were funny, a dinner plate would be hilarious. Tried to remember someone I didn't know. Day 25. Spent most of the morning trying to exit the lighthouse through the keyhole. It proved impossible. I shall have to kill Marmaduke, but what with? Smike put down the diary. The last few entries were rather peculiar. Was Colibri being funny? Had he lost the urge to write? Was he merely fooling around? Smike glanced over his shoulder. He had a feeling the professor was watching him while he read. Day 26. I really don't know if I should mention this, but last night I bumped into my father. At first I thought it was my reflection in the old mirror. I was halfway up the stairs when we met, and he never so much as glanced at me. This is odd because my father has been dead 50 years. These inexplicable occurrences have become more frequent of late. Am I worried? Not really. Strangely enough, the more frequent they become, the less they seem to matter. How many colibris on the fogometer? Who cares? Day 27. Did I pen the last 4 entries? I must have because they're in my handwriting, but what demented dribble they are. Am I losing my mind? I've no recollection of the last 4 days. Afraid I must be sick. A reoccurrence of the demonic influenza? I don't feel well. I'm edgy, jumpy, suffering from hot flushes. I'd stop work at once if this second auragram weren't almost ready. Day 28. Was that curious entry yesterday? Of course, I penned the 4 previous entries, but who is responsible for yesterday's? Odd. It's in my handwriting. Could it be the fellow I met on the stairs? A doppelganger at work here? Is he in league with the laden mannequin? Resolved to be more on my guard. I can't even trust myself now. Meant to go shopping in town, but failed once more to leave the lighthouse by the keyhole. I must lose weight. Day 29. Lost every last ounce of weight in a single day, as planned. The only trouble is I'm now invisible. I don't really exist anymore. On the other hand, I can get through the keyhole with ease. I dance through the fog, free as air. Heard strange music issuing from the earth's core last night. Detected mysterious messages in the roar of the waves. Have still to decipher them. Day 30. Yea, neighbor of all neighbors, I abhor thee. I shall exterminate Marmaduke. I shall exterminate Lakibri. Yea, neighbor of all neighbors, I abhor thee. Yea, neighbor of all neighbors, I abhor thee. I shall exterminate Marmaduke. I shall exterminate Lakibri. Yea, neighbor of all neighbors, I abhor thee. Yea, neighbor of all neighbors, I abhor thee. I shall exterminate Marmaduke. I shall exterminate Lockabri. Yea, neighbor of all neighbors, I abhor thee. Smike skipped several pages of which the same piece of gibberish seemed to be repeated ad infinitum. What did it mean? Had Colibri really lost his mind, or had he joined the ranks of the literati, and were these the opening words of an avant-garde novel written for his personal delectation? Then came some lines that made sense. Day 31. Yet another gap in my memory. 2 whole days. Did I really write that balderdash? What does it mean? This can't go on. I must leave here. This morning, when I awoke, with all 4 brains aching badly, I found Marmaduke floating lifeless in his nutrient fluid. Did the fog sample kill him, or did I? Final evaluation of the auragram this afternoon. Tomorrow I shall pack up and leave. Day 32. I have analyzed the auragram. I'm not feeling well, and not just because of what I saw in it. I must take advantage of what may be my last spell of lucidity before fog succeeds in unhinging my mind. No time for explanations, just the salient facts. 1. The fog isn't a meteorological phenomenon, it's a living creature. The auragram clearly displays some organic structures, it may be animate gas. 2. The inhabitants of Merkholm are secretly in league with this vaporous creature. A form of unwholesome symbiosis, I suspect. 3. The fog drives anyone who isn't a Merkholmer insane. I know what I'm talking about. 4. This city is a trap. I have no explanation for this, and no knowledge of the Merkholmers' intentions, but I assume them to be of a malign nature. 5. A connection exists between Merkholm and all the rumors about Netherworld. The auragram displays structures that do not occur in any organism known to me. The fog does not emanate from the sea, it issues from the earth itself. Should these notes be found by someone who isn't a Merkholmer, may they serve as a warning. You who are reading those words, make good your escape. Run for it while you still can. I heard a knock at the door. They've come. They've come for me. Colibri's diary broke off at this point. Smike stopped reading like someone emerging from a nightmare. His brow was beaded with sweat, and it took him a moment to remember where he was. The fog outside the lighthouse window resembled a huge spectral figure performing the dance of the seven veils. Dawn had broken while Smike was reading. I'm in Merkholm, he said dully. There was a knock on the door. Startled, he dropped the diary. Professor Colibri, at last, he cried in relief. He hurried over to the window. The fog was omnipresent, but not so dense as to conceal the fact that the lighthouse was surrounded. The inhabitants of Merkholm had assembled below en masse and were fixing Smike with their watery gaze. They've come, he muttered. They've come for me. Crindle and Dandelion. Rumo, no fencing lesson today. We're off to the annual fair. Urs, who was in high spirits as they hurried towards the east gate, had been blathering about the fair for days. Countless wisps of unfamiliar scents were drifting across the city, and Rumo viewed the occasion with mixed feelings. If Urs was to be believed, the main object was to eat as many different unwholesome things as possible. By the time they reached the gate, the fairground noises were so loud that they had to shout to make themselves heard. Ma'am, I've been waiting for this exactly a year, cried Urs, rubbing his paws together. The sideshows, the mulled ale, the mouse bladders. Mouse bladders, Rumo called back. Urs handed him a purse. There, your fairground pocket money, with the mayor's compliments. The sheer size of the spectacle made Rumo gasp like a puppy who sees a sparkler for the first time. Wolperting was surrounded by hundreds of tents of every size, shape, and color, festooned with flags, pennants, and streamers. Their entrances were flanked by advertising posters and blazing torches. They were round tents with pointed roofs, rectangular tents with flat ones, octagonal tents culminating in quadruple domes. Tiny tents less than a meter in diameter and huge tents that jutted into the night sky like castles. The fairground was a city in itself, with streets and squares, boardwalks, steps, and bridges. Expanding into the woods and spanning the city's moat, it even included floating tents mounted on boats and pontoons. The whole thing had sprouted from the ground in a very short time, subjecting Wolperting to an enjoyable form of siege that was scheduled to last for a week. Rumo marveled at the bewildering diversity of Simonian life forms, many of which he had never set eyes on before. Waterkins and moomies, cinnamon and vulpheads, birts and voltigorks, bufadistas and maenads, montanic dwarfs and hellraisers, yetis and huskers, Venetian midgets and tulorognomes, demi-giants and powdermen, rickshaw demons and zebraskins. Still more bewildering was the fact that many of them wore bizarre costumes and masks, papier-mâché heads, and false noses. Others walked on stilts or rode around in absurd contraptions with wheels, waved multicolored flags, or dressed up as wandering vegetables. Many spat fire. One showman juggled with burning torches, another with talking heads. Rumo pricked up his ears. The air was throbbing with sounds that were never to be heard on other occasions. Singing saws, glockenspiels, demonic cries, volpad madrigals, wooden rattles, mouth drums, footbells. Laughter rang out on all sides, mingled with shrill cries of terror from the ghost trains and the squeal of bagpipes. Hordes of musicians playing curious instruments competed for the public's attention and strove to drown each other. Bassophonus made grounds shake. A buffadista soprano sang of unrequited love. For old Zamonian, stall-holders did their best to outshout one another. Rockets soared hissing into the air. Paper ducks quacked. Tin drums beat a tattoo. A garishly made-up rickshaw demon leapt at Rumo and laughingly sprinkled him with blazing confetti. It was all too much for Rumo's sensitive ears. At a loss, he shut his eyes and instantly saw in his mind's eye a colossal painting composed of whirling golden spirals, dancing rainbows, writhing serpents of dazzling light, multicolored flashes of ball lightning. He hurriedly opened his eyes again and lost his balance. "Whoops!" he exclaimed. He blundered into Urs, who had to hang on tight. There were the smells: cinnamon, honey, saffron, grilled sausages, roast marsh hog, dried cod, mulled wine, smoked eel, baked apples, onion soup, incense, tobacco smoke, goose dripping. Outside most of the booths that sold the food were small braziers in which garlic and onion bulbs were burnt to lend the night air an appetizing aroma. Goose, chicken, and turkey legs, encased in a clay coat, slowly in pits filled with glowing charcoal. Thick, fragrant soup of pig's trotters and peas simmered in a massive cast-iron cauldron. Potatoes and onions were sautéed in a thyme-flavored oil. Quail fried in lard, trout grilled on sticks. Legs of lamb sizzled over open fires. Corn cobs and loaves of bread were baked in clay ovens. A whole ostrich revolved on a spit, while ravenous montanic dwarfs sat round it, clattering their knives and forks. Myrrh was burnt, joss sticks smoldered. Masked moobies tossed curry powder into the air. Rumo continued to cling to Urs. "Pull yourself together," Urs whispered in his ear. "You're behaving like a country bumpkin visiting Atlantis for the first time. These fairground folk will gut you like a marsh hog if they see you like this. Look casual. Pretend you've seen it all 1,000 times before. Just take your cue from me." Urs stuck his paws in his pockets, squared his shoulders, and assumed an air of boredom. Then he sauntered off, deliberately dragging his feet. Rumo tried to copy his manner as faithfully as possible. "The beasters. Look at those beasters from Honey Valley," cried Urs. "That's the legendary queen bee honey they're selling. It's supposed to make you immortal." He indicated a group of eye-catching individuals who were ladling honey out of big clay jars and dispensing it to their customers. They wore beehive hats with hundreds of bees flying busily in and out of them. "They're reputed to be insects themselves," Urs said with a grin. "Gigantic queen bees. No one has ever seen them without clothes on. Is that what you believe?" "Oh, sure, they're huge, immortal queen bees. And they work at the fair," Urs laughed. Flying pancakes. The crowd swept them along like flotsam and washed them up in front of another spectacle. A whey-faced gnome in bulky wooden clogs was tossing discs of dough into the air. They spun round and round, becoming wider and flatter. "Fresh flying pancakes!" cried the gnome. "Fresh flying pancakes!" A second gnome caught the discs on a flat wooden shovel and thrust them into a charcoal stove, while a third fried potato chips in hot oil. "Wait a moment," said Urs. "You may learn something." Rumo obediently came to a halt and watched the spectacle. When the pancakes were ready, the gnomes removed them from the oven, fashioned them into cornets, and filled them with golden yellow chips. Urs bought one. "With peanut butter, please," he entreated, and the first gnome anointed his cornet with generous dollop of pale brown goo. Urs promptly proceeded to cram his belly with greasy chips. "One of Simonian's cuisine's most brilliant inventions," he said, munching away. He broke off a piece of cornet and dipped it in the thick peanut sauce. "You can even eat the packaging." "Hey," said Rumo. A Volped wearing a brightly colored bobble hat had come up and grabbed him by the waistcoat. "Painless scars." "How about a painless scar?" he asked, holding a knife with a milk-white blade under Rumo's nose. Rumo reacted instantly. He gripped the Volped's wrist with one paw and his throat with the other. The newcomer's face turned blue and his knife fell to the ground with a clatter. "What about a painless dislocated neck?" Rumo retorted. Urs hurried over. Let him go, Rumo. That was a genuine business offer. You need only say no. Rumo released the volped, who backed away, fighting for breath. My friend is from the country, Urs said apologetically. This is his first annual fair. That's all right, gasped the volped. Later, maybe. Have some mulled ale. Relax. We're all friends here. We inflict the finest scars anywhere in the fairground. Later, maybe. He retrieved his knife and walked off, grinning. Those knives are made of elfin jade, Urs explained. He stuffed the rest of the potato chips into his mouth and tossed the tip of the cornet away. Elfin jade, he went on with his mouth full, is the stuff that falls from elfin wasps' wings when they wake up and give them a shake. He swallowed the last chip. If you collect elfin jade and subject it to extreme pressure, you can use it to forge knives that inflict painless cuts. You could amputate someone's arm and it wouldn't hurt. Here, look. He parted some clumps of fur on his right forearm to reveal a skillfully incised scar shaped like a broken heart. In the middle was a name. Sheena. Rumo stared at it. Sheena of the Snows. She was my silver thread. It never came to anything, alas. She went off to Florence. I was heartbroken. Urs pretended to wipe away a tear. That's a painless scar made by an elfin jade knife. Girls go crazy if they see you with a scar like that, especially if the name is their own. Urs gave another wink of the kind Rumo found so puzzling. They paused outside a tent in front of which a demi-dwarf in jester's motley was alternately breathing fire and haranguing the crowd. Roll up, and feast your eyes on Freda, the alpine imp. Clean-shaven and hairless, the most horrific sight in Zamonia. Children not admitted. No liability for heart attacks accepted. Scores of people were streaming into the tent. Urs hustled his friend away. What's an alpine imp? Asked Rumo. Why should anyone want to pay to see something horrific? Who knows? Snow showmen don't try to sell you what you want. What then? Whatever they can talk you into. I don't understand. We aren't here to understand anything. What then? Mouse bladders. What then? You're starting to get on my nerves. Have some fun, that's all. Urs broke off. Oh, look, mouse bladders. They were standing in front of a huge cast-iron frying pan in which dozens of walnut-sized sausages were sizzling. Some mouse bladders, gentlemen? Inquired the chef, a water-can and a fat bespattered apron. Their choicest bladders taken from the pedigree Ornean piddle-mice. Urs raised one finger. Even the most sophisticated gourmets, he pontificated in solemn tones, are bowled over by the subtle flavor of an expertly prepared mouse bladder the first time they sample one. The secret is to keep the bladder intact when you pipe the mouse meat stuffing through its cystic canals. The meat must be minced at least 33 times until it's almost liquid, rendered even more so by the addition of garlic juice, sour cream, and mouse gravy, and seasoned with dilute salt, paprika, and olive oil. Many chefs add cumin, but that's barbaric. The stuffing must be loaded into a cake icer and pumped into the interior of the mouse organ until it's filled to bursting. Finally, the cystic canals are tied off with kitchen twine to keep the juices from escaping. Saliva was trickling from the corners of Ursa's mouth. Next, equal quantities of butter and olive oil are heated in a heavy cast-iron pan, and the bladders are fried for a few minutes until golden brown. They are then kept warm until consumption by being gently smoked over a licorice root grill. It should be added that bladder of the South Ornean piddle mouse, that the only mouse of which this dish should consist, is one of the most hard-working digestive organs to be found in any Zamodian life form. In fact, this industrious variety of mouse spends nearly all its life passing water, hence the elasticity and concentrated flavor of its bladder. One's first taste of mouse bladder is a positive revelation. 2 portions, please. Well? Urs asked expectantly. He had watched with growing exasperation as Rumo tossed bladder after bladder into his mouth and gulped them down without chewing them even once. His friend showed no signs of enjoyment, still less rapture. Huh? Rumo said vaguely. Those mouse bladders. Tasty? The ghost train. Oh, yes, thanks. Rumo tossed the empty paper bag heedlessly over his shoulder. He had spotted Rala queuing up outside a huge black tent adorned with posters advertising the unspeakable attractions inside. Hey, that's a ghost train, Urs said, his mouth full. We must try it, definitely. He walked over to the posters and started to read them. Rumo trailed after him, never letting Rala out of his sight. She hadn't noticed him in the crowd. Listen to this. They claim that the horrific figures inside are all real. Apparently, they cut down the victims of hangings and embalmed them, then string them up again. Ho ho, nerves of steel required, eh? Urs tossed the last of the mouse splatters into his mouth. They robbed the graves of cemeteries reserved for outlaws. You can do what you like with them. Those graveyards are run by genuine barley moomies and forest demons. Look at that list there. It gives the number of deaths that have occurred on the ghost train. 14 heart attacks, 7 strokes, and 1 suicide. And that's all in one season. Man, we can't afford to miss this, Urs giggled inanely. Rumo didn't feel like paying someone good money to try to frighten him. He was past being frightened since his adventures on Roaming Rock. It says someone on this ghost train was so scared by a movie he developed a nosebleed that simply wouldn't stop until it drained his body dry. They have left him here as a permanent attraction, going round and round in a car filled with his own congealed blood. Rumo was covertly watching Rala. Urs followed the direction of his gaze. Hey, there's Rala. She's going for a ride, too. Rumo would have found it quite impossible to walk up to Rala and accost her. He would sooner have picked a fight with the dozen of bloodums employed to push the fairground swing boats. Before he could pursue that thought any further, Urs had fixed everything. He simply went up to Rala and laid a hand on her shoulder. They exchanged a few words, then Urs beckoned to Rumo, who walked stiffly towards them. He stuck out his paw and mouthed out some form of salutation when he was still yards away. Why didn't his body obey him when Rala was close at hand? Why did her proximity always make him feel as if he were two of him? As if he could see himself in his own awkward gestures? What was the magical power that emanated from this girl, and why was Urs unaffected by it? He resolved to shake Rala's paw gently but firmly, gaze deep into her eyes, and speak in a slow, clear, sonorous voice. "Hello, Rumo," Rala said affably. They were the very first words she had ever addressed to him. Hello," Rumo replied in a muffled voice, lowering his eyes. He withdrew his paw just as Rala was about to shake it. Then he blushed and stared at the ground. Urs shot him a reproving glance. "We're going together," Urs said firmly. "It'll work out cheaper for all of us." Rumo stood rooted to the spot. His mouth was so dry that he was afraid of biting his tongue if he spoke, so he said nothing. "There are some genuine bats flying around in there, so watch your coiffure," Urs told Rala jocularly as he boarded the car with Rumo and sat her down between them. The car was a tight squeeze, so they squashed together. A change came over Rumo when he felt Rala's arm against his. He started to sweat. "Hey, are you scared?" asked Rala, who had noticed his uneasy expression. "I'm never scared," Rumo replied hoarsely. "Oh ho," said Rala, imitating his croak. "So you're never scared, eh?" A Yeti bent over the car and secured the door. "In the event of a fatality during the ride," he said darkly, "kindly don't throw the corpse out of the car. The ghouls would eat it, and they're supposed to be on a diet." Urs and Rala tittered. Rumo tried to join in, but his contorted facial muscles refused to relax into a smile. He looked as if he might throw up at any moment. "Have a good scare," the Yeti gave them a wave as the car glided past him into the gloom beyond the swing door. "And never forget, life is more horrific than death." Darkness engulfed them. All that could be heard was the rattle of the car and the distant screams of other passengers. Rumo tried to ignore the alarming scents, but couldn't. There seemed to be a lot of malign spirits lurking in the gloom. A thin plaintive cry rang out. It was only just audible, like a final plea for help from someone buried alive. "Ooh!" Rala exclaimed, feigning terror. She nestled still closer to Rumo. A miniature flat car came clanking out of the darkness. On it was the dimly illuminated figure of a dead dwarf sitting in a tub of congealed blood. As they passed it, Rumo noticed a cobweb clinging to the head of the desiccated corpse, and a rent in the neck from which sawdust was escaping. Rivulets of blood were trickling down the figure's chest and into the tub. The hedge witch. The car stopped abruptly. With a thunderclap, the ground ahead of them opened. There was a shell burst of red and yellow paper streamers. A cloud of green vapor arose, and when it dispersed, they were confronted by a gigantic hedge witch. She wore a robe of autumn leaves. Her limbs were thin, gnarled branches and two will-o'-the-wisps glimmered in the empty eye sockets in her wooden skull. Her lower jaw dropped open and released a white moth into the darkness. A hot wind swirled round the car as they reached for Rolla's face. With her pointed, thorny fingers, Rolla clung so tightly to Rumo that he could feel almost the whole of her body against his, the most thrilling sensation he'd ever experienced. I'm going to faint, he thought, with a frisson of ecstasy. But he remained conscious. There was another clap of thunder, and the witch vanished. Rolla continued to hang on tight. Was she real? She asked. Yes, said Urs, real but stuffed. The witch had in fact been the ride's piece de resistance. Like all ghost trains, this one had promised more than it delivered. The desiccated corpses that danced around in the flickering light may have been real, and the malign spirits Rumo had sensed were probably just the ghost train's staff of down at heel bloodums and other riffraff, who filled the tunnels with spooky cries and acted as ghosts in ill-draped bed-sheets. Rumo could scarcely stand when he climbed out of the car. His knees were knocking, he was trembling all over, and his fur was glistening with perspiration. The witch was good, said Urs, but the rest... So you don't know the meaning of fear, eh? Rolla said to Rumo. She laughed, but her laughter sounded friendly and unmalicious. Outside in the milling crowd, Rumo tried desperately to think of some snappy retort, but before he could do so, Rolla had been spotted by someone. It was Rolf, who was standing on the other side of the street with Bala, Olek, and a girl whom Rumo recognized from school. Rolf waved. Rolla left Rumo's side without a word, elbowed her way through the throng, and threw her arms around Rolf's neck. Rumo gasped. Since when had they been so friendly? There! Rolla had given Rolf a kiss on the cheek. The ground seemed to yawn at his feet. Then a party of roistering fairgoers surged past, hiding Rolf, Rolla, and the others from view, and they were gone. Girls, Urs said with a shrug. You never know where you are with them. Rumo shut his eyes and tried to make out the silver thread, but his mental images were so chaotic he might have been peering into a kaleidoscope. Smoldering herbs, rank sweat, and crude smells of all kinds combined to form such a rotating mishmash of colors that he hurriedly opened his eyes again. If he'd had to rely for guidance on his nose alone, he would have blundered into the nearest tent pole. Come on, we haven't seen anything yet. Rumo plodded sullenly along in Ursa's wake. How this din was getting on his nerves. The vulgar music, the stench. Why had Rolla thrown herself into the arms of that repulsive creature? Why had she done so in front of everyone? Why in front of him? And how had that little terrier become so pally with her? What was he himself doing in this lunatic asylum of a fairground? He longed to go home. Hey, you! Yelled a voice in Rumo's sensitive ears. A gaunt and peculiarly hideous black-robed figure had planted itself in front of him and was pointing at him accusingly with a pencil-thin forefinger. Yes, you! The Uglies. Rumo and Urs had reached into the intersection of the two tent-lined avenues. 3 female figures, attired in black, were dancing around a big iron cauldron into which they periodically tossed small, squeaking creatures. It was one of them who had barred Rumo's path. Most of the fairgoers steered well clear of this spectacle. Uglies, Urs whispered. Don't let them foist a prophecy on you. You! Cried the tallest of the uglies, leveling her long finger at Rumo. Listen to me, I'm the ugly Posco. Urs tugged at Rumo's sleeve, but he was rooted to the spot. You are destined to see in the dark, and kill the one-eyed giants. I already did, Rumo said quietly. What? Said the ugly. Yes, that was in the past. All this noise is spoiling my concentration. Rumo was amazed. Smike was the only one who knew anything about him and the roaming rock. Did you really? Asked Urs. Kill some one-eyed giants, I mean. Concentration be darned, cried another of the uglies, who was short and fat. You've never managed to prophesy about anything except the past, Posco. Come here, youngster, I'm the ugly Crasco. I can tell you the future. You'll walk along the streets of solid gold, and health and wealth will be your constant companions throughout a long, happy life. Permit me to fill in the details. You lying devil, shouted the third ugly. Beware of her, youngster. She'll only tell you what you want to hear. Consult me, the ugly Bisco. I can predict the only important thing in your life, whether or not you'll win your silver thread. That's what matters, isn't it? I know you Wolpertings. Rumo pricked up his ears at this. He got out his purse. Urs took his arm. Put it away, they'll only cheat you. Isn't that what fairs are for? A dwarf with a placard on his chest suddenly appeared on the scene. Nightingale is everywhere. Enough of this oracular guesswork, he yelled. Enough of this disreputable hocus-pocus. Consult Professor Abdullah Nightingale's chest of drawers oracle in the star tent. Only that will provide you with the scientifically attested prophecies, absolutely reliable predictions on a purely empirical basis, no commercialism involved, admission free. The tall ugly aimed a kick at the dwarf, who nimbly dodged it and disappeared into the crowd. Enough of this oracular guesswork, he croaked again. Then his voice was drowned by the general tumult. Urs took advantage of the rumpus to drag Rumo away. Hey, but I was going to... Tell me, what was all that about one-eyed giants, etc.? Nothing special. Nothing special? Come on now. A noisy crowd of revelers came dancing along the streets toward them. Dwarves, gnomes, a few bloodums, several Menads and Berts, dozens of Yetis, all in shabby costumes and clearly the worse for drink. They were waving little flags and wooden rattles and splashing passers-by with the contents of huge pitchers of beer. Unprepared for such an onslaught, Urs and Rumo were borne along by them. It wasn't until they'd been swept past a few dozen booths that they managed to extricate themselves from the mob. Panting hard, they took stock of their surroundings. A prize-fighting tent run by bloodums, a booth where blood could be pawned, a shadow theater, a coconut shy. A black tent adorned with twinkling stars. The inconspicuous sign above the entrance read, Professor Abdullah Nightingale's Simonian chest of drawers oracle. Strictly scientific predictions, none of your usual fairground hocus-pocus. Finally, an unmarked red tent from whose golden domed roof dense black smoke was ascending into the sky. What's that red tent? Is it on fire? The Fogar dealer, Urs whispered conspiratorially in Rumo's ear. That's a Fogar tent, my friend, nothing for sensitive souls. Fogars? Smike had enthused about them. Occasionally, Rumo recalled. They aren't allowed to advertise. Atlantean health regulations prohibit it, but they can't prevent lungless people from having a smoke. But we've got lungs. What makes you so sure? Can you see inside yourself? Perhaps you're one of nature's miracles. You'll never know if you don't try one. Urs hustled Rumo towards the entrance of the Fogar tent. I've always wanted to try a Fogar. Come on, I'll stand you one. The Fogar dealer, an uncouth turnip head with an ill-fitting turban, eyed them suspiciously. Is this your first Fogar? I don't want any trouble with the Atlantean Health Ministry. I was smoking Fogars before these ridiculous laws existed, Urs declared with surprising self-assurance, and my brother here doesn't even have one lung, a congenital defect. 2 Fogars, please. The Fogar dealer looked past them to see if he could spot any Atlantean health inspectors in the crowd. Then he beckoned them into the tent. You must be one of nature's miracles, he said, handing Urs the Fogars. That'll be 4 pyras. Rumo's first puff seemed to fill his lungs with boiling fog. He tried to expel the smoke at once, but his throat felt as if it were in a noose. Panic-stricken, he looked at Urs, who was sitting opposite him with his back propped against the wall of the tent. He, too, had lowered his Fogar after the first puff. His body looked like a candle left too close to a hot stove, and his face was melting like the butter in the sun. He seemed to be dissolving completely. Was that the effect of Urs's Fogar, or his own? Rumo would have liked to ask him, but he couldn't speak, let alone breathe. His panic intensified. Perhaps some oxygen would help. He staggered past the Fogar dealer and made for the entrance, fighting for breath. So you aren't one of nature's miracles after all, eh? The turnip had said unfeelingly. You can't force it, youngster. The smoke will either exit of its own accord or not at all. The worst thing to exert pressure, just don't breathe. Rumo tottered along the avenue. Noises, sights, smells, everything became amalgamated into a vortex that whirled around him. Dwarfs wearing sandwich boards cried their wares. Roll up, discuss Florentine torturers' techniques with the talking gallows. Age-old folkloric information humorously imparted. Rice grain literature, whole novels inscribed by bonsai mites on grains of creamed rice, hundreds of titles in stock. Walk up, see Freda, the horrible, hairless, alpine imp. Even the thickest skin can scarcely endure the sight. Get the heebie-jeebies or your money back. Rumo tottered on through the jostling fairgoers. Was that Rala drifting past? Rolf, Bala, and Oglek? Were they laughing at him? The smoke rampaged around his chest and rattled his ribs like a beast in a cage. He bumped into someone he could cling to for support. Then he vomited, retching up everything inside him, his breakfast, the mouse bladders, the fogar smoke. Hey, the voice seemed to come from very far away. My jacket! Rumo passed out. Fogars only agree with shark grubs, and I wouldn't advise even them in the star tent to smoke once. Are you a shark grub? No. Are you an idiot? Yes. Who had said that? It was pitch black. My lovely jacket, ruined in all probability, mouse bladders, greasy, unwholesome things, almost worthless from the nutritional point of view. That plus the fogar smoke, a disastrous combination. Where was he? Lying on the ground? Apparently. Rumo raised his head. Hello? He said feebly. Anyone there? Two lights went on in the darkness. No, not lights. They were eyes. Huge, luminous, yellow eyes. Was he dreaming? No, you aren't dreaming, the voice said rather curtly. That's what a nocturnomath's eyes look like in the dark. And yes, I'm something of a mind reader. As for the gap in your memory, you smoked a fogar, suffered a temporary collapse of the lungs, and puked all over my jacket. Now you're in my star tent. More precisely, in Professor Abdullah Nightingale's incorruptible chest of drawers oracle. Admission free, but I ought to claim compensation for the jacket. Would you like a little light? A match flared and a candle was lit. Rumo could see the nocturnomath better now. He differed in appearance from Professor Colibri. There were some strange excrescences protruding from his head, and he looked older, but in other respects the same puny physique, the same wrinkled face, the same huge glowing eyes. What you call excrescences are my external brains. I don't like to brag, but I possess 7 brains. The gnome gave a little self-deprecating cough. It was silent. Amazing how little of the fairground din penetrated the tent. None at all, in fact. This tent is made of noise-absorbent silk obtained from deaf silkworms, an invention that could make me another fortune if I went into mass production. It's the thickness of a fingernail, but an entire brass band could play in here and you wouldn't hear a single note outside. The same thing applies in reverse, of course. You have no idea the noises the material emits when I give it its monthly whacking with a carpet beater. In the middle of the tent, as far as Rumo could make out, stood a chest of drawers. It was absolutely plain and made of dark, almost black wood. He debated whether to mention that he'd heard of Nightingale from Professor Colibri. Rather than complicate matters unnecessarily, he decided not to. My name is Rumo, he said instead. Rumo of Zamonia. Like the card game? How original. I played a few games of Rumo myself. It was in that gambler's paradise called Rumo stood up. He yearned to go home. Well, many thanks for your hospitality. Where's the exit? In spite of the candle, it was still so dark that all he could see was the chest of drawers. Yes, it's pretty dark in here, said the professor, but there are miracles that can only occur in the dark. Where's the exit, please? You don't want to try out my oracle? To be honest, no. I'm not feeling too good, and I've had it up to here with this fairground hocus pocus. Nightingale's eyes flashed, and something inside his head crackled ominously. Hocus pocus, he hissed. This isn't hocus pocus, it's scientific exactitude. I'm sure it is, but excusingly Nightingale held his soiled jacket to the candlelight. The sight was so nauseating that Rumo heaved despite himself. Sit down on that chair. Rumo blinked. Yes, there was a chair behind him. He sat down. All right, if it won't take long. No, it's over in a flash. You open a drawer, that's all. Very well. I'll explain the whole thing. Shall I quickly infect you with the information? Nightingale approached with his forefinger leveled at Rumo's ear. Rumo shuddered, involuntarily remembering the Colibri Smike episode. No, he said, I'd rather not. Nightingale withdrew his finger, looking disappointed. In that case, it's the slow and laborious way. Would you like a detailed exposition of the short version? Rumo groaned faintly and clutched his head. The short version, please. Right, we'll skip the theoretical aspect and spare ourselves the scientific minutiae. All you need to know is this. That chest of drawers there, which you probably assume to be made of wood, consists of highly concentrated darkness, a darkness dating from a time when time did not exist. It's the only material in the universe, if material it may be called, that is free from the shackles of time and capable of summoning up the future. If you ask me how I managed to... Rumo gave another groan. All right, no details, just the crux of the matter. I'm not interested in foretelling the future, to be honest. That's just an amusing byproduct of my invention. No, what interests me is the effect on people of knowing their own future. In other words, how much future they can endure. At the very least, it will confirm my theory, The no existing Zamonian life form, Nocturnamaths accepted, of course, can really bear to know our own future. Sorry, can really bear to know its own future. Are you prepared to help me discover the truth, card game? My name is Rumo. Sorry, I got a trifle mixed up. Nightingale's brains crackled again. It's quite simple. You must think of the name of someone whose future you want to know. If you want to see your own future, simply think of your own name. Then the door bearing the first letter of your name will open, and you can look inside. There won't be all that much to see, just a glimpse, that's all. Then the door will close again, and that'll be that. Yes, all right, said Romeo. Can we begin? At once, but first I must extinguish the candle. As I already said, some miracles can only occur in the dark. Nightingale blew out the candle, plunging the tent in total darkness. The Kingdom of Death. She really is a genuine alpine imp, Nightingale muttered as he entered the tent. The last of her kind, incredible. I shall have to purchase her. He lit the candle and saw Rumo kneeling on the floor in tears. Too embarrassed to speak for a while, he tidied some things away. At length he said, You saw into the kingdom of death, didn't you? Rumo didn't answer. I'd like to be able to tell you it was all an illusion, a fairground conjuring trick, but you know better. You sensed it. The oracle isn't malevolent or spiteful. It simply shows some random moment in the future, coldly and objectively. In your case, that moment must have been particularly distressing. I'm sorry. I must go, said Rumo, rising to his feet. Hey, wait, young Wolperting. You won't do anything silly, will you? Rumo headed in the direction from which he'd seen Nightingale enter. The professor hurried after him and caught him by the sleeve. Wait a moment. As if deprived of willpower, Rumo came to a halt. Negative infection. You can't go out there like that. What would people think? More important, you can't go through life like that. It would be too wretched for words. Let me take a little of the burden off your shoulders. Nightingale seized Rumo's paw and held it tight. His voice suddenly rang out in Rumo's head. What you're now experiencing is a negative infection, also known as Nightingale's lightning amnesia. The technique requires a great deal of practice. I doubt if anyone with fewer than 7 brains could master it. Rumo's head started to spin. He clung to Nightingale's hand. Your distressing knowledge of the future will now be mine. I can cope with it. One of my 7 brains will absorb it with ease and convert it into pure information. In a moment you'll leave this tent remembering nothing. Many thanks for your help, but I'm afraid this discovery will have to be consigned to the Chamber of Unperfected Patents. People are not mature enough to handle the future, or not insensitive enough. Even though you can never escape what you saw, it won't prey on your mind until you actually experience it. Until then, young Wolperting, all the best. Nightingale released Rumo's paw and thrust him outside. The din, the smells, the pandemonium of the fair descended on him like a sudden hailstorm. He stood outside Nightingale's tent, completely dazed. Turning round, he read, Professor Abdullah Nightingale's Ammonian chest of drawers oracle. An oracle! Just about the last thing he felt like right now. He was feeling nauseous. But where to now? Home, that's where. Where was Urs? Choose your weapon. Rumo tottered along the tent-lined avenue. Fogars, ugh, what revolting things. He would never, ever be talked into. A paw came down on his shoulder. It was hers. Rumo, I've been looking for you everywhere. I threw up. Me too, 4 times. Know what's so great about it? No. I'm stone cold sober. Urs beamed and spread his arms. We can start again from scratch. How about a few more mouse splatters? You must be joking. I want to go home. Home? Now? And miss one of the greatest experiences of your life? What's that? Another ride on a ghost train? Another Fogar? No, no, Rumo. The absolute highlight of the night. It's my official duty as your municipal friend. Urs thumped himself on the chest. First, though, I need something to eat. Come on. Urs conducted him to the nearest mouse bladder stall and devoured another portion of mouse bladders while Rumo stood alongside surveying the throng of revelers with an air of disdain. Then he remembered Rala and Rolf, and his spirits sank to their lowest ebb. Pin your ears back, Rumo, said Urs. He belched. We're now coming to the ceremonial part of the proceedings, the great moment. Get on with it, then. Follow me. Urs led the way. Irritatingly slowly, it seemed to Rumo, they turned off down an alleyway where the noise was somewhat more subdued. Passing a flower stall, a lottery stand, and a roast chestnut vendor, they came to a big, dark tent with 2 torches outside. You like reading signboards, Urs said eagerly. Tell me what's written on that one up there. Choose your weapon, Rumo read. Choose your weapon. Precisely. What do you mean, precisely? It's an invitation. You can choose yourself a weapon. I don't understand. This is the Wolperting weapon tent, Urs announced solemnly. You can go inside and choose a weapon. Your weapon for life, I mean. And I, as your municipal friend, am allowed to assist you. Don't worry about the expense. It's already settled. Every new Wolperting is permitted to select a weapon at his first annual fair. You know, civic rights and duties. This is one of your rights. It's an ancient tradition. It dates back to Hoth's day, and one moment, Rumo cut in. You mean I can simply walk in there and choose myself a weapon? Why didn't you tell me this before? I didn't want to spoil our night out. I know you. Once you've chosen the thing, you won't have eyes for anything else. All right, get in there. Urs propelled him towards the entrance. The interior of the tent was sparsely illuminated by a few torches. Around the sides stood some long wooden tables and several cabinets, and there was a massive iron table in the center. Rumo scanned the arsenal on display. The tables were laden with heavy battle axes, 2-edged swords, balls and chains, and halberds. Elegant rapiers, graded according to length and tensile strength, reposed in wooden stands. Laid out on one of the tables were at least 200 bows, many of them as long as Rumo was tall. There were racks of iron-bound clubs and cabinets filled with throwing knives, spears, foils, spiked throwing discs, knuckle dusters, gutting knives, and scythes. Heavy hammers designed to be chained to the wrist rubbed shoulders with single, double, triple, or even quadruple crossbows, barbed switchblades, and glass daggers from Florence. Weapons, Urs said distastefully. Pooh! Heavens alive, said Rumo. What a vast selection! How was one supposed to decide? By a process of elimination, Urs advised. Rumo toured the tables. Urs was right. A lot of the weapons could be ruled out right away. For instance, only barbarians used those spiked balls on chains. Halberds he considered ridiculously impractical, too big, too heavy, and less of a help than a hindrance in confined spaces. Clubs and hammers, ideal weapons for clumsy great hunks like yetis and bloodums. Spiked throwing discs and daggers had their points, but were secondary weapons. A sword was infinitely preferable. That narrowed the choice down to sabers, swords, rapiers, and cut-and-thrust weapons in general. Rumo went over to the bows and crossbows. They were splendid pieces of equipment, made of the finest woods and sinews, adorned and reinforced with precious metals. A crossbow or a bow and arrow enabled you to hunt and kill an enemy at a safe distance. On the other hand, a well-aimed sword or stiletto could kill just as effectively, and one could hardly parry a blade with a longbow. Ergo, it had to be a blade of some kind. Rumo went over to the sword. The sword. Some 100 blades were lying higgledy-piggledy on a big black tabletop. Huge 2-pointed broadswords for delivering sweeping blows. Elegant Florentine rapiers with needle-sharp points and decorative engraving. Single-handed swords forged out of dozens of laminae. Ordinary military swords, ground on both sides. Epées, Midgardian cavalry sabers, twin-bladed knives, scimitars with serrated blades, and a small sword of unusual conformation. The blade was slit down the middle like a snake's forked tongue. Take me, the sword said in a piping voice. Rumo jumped back in alarm. Had Urs whispered in his ear? No, Urs was standing beside a table on the other side of the tent, distastefully eyeing a ball and chain. Take me, the sword repeated. I'm the weapon for you. Rumo stared at it in amazement. Forget the other stuff, it said. That's just common or garden rubbish. I'm a work of art. What? Said Rumo. What? Said Urs. He glanced across at Rumo, but Rumo didn't reply. He seemed to be examining a sword. Don't answer me aloud. Answer me in your head if you don't want to look like an idiot, said the sword. The others can't hear me. What's the matter with me? Thought Rumo. Am I going mad? Not yet, said the sword. But it could easily happen once you've seen me in action. You wouldn't believe the things I can do. I specialize in the impossible. Rumo peered harder. No, the sword wasn't moving. Where was the voice coming from? It's time you caught on. I'm a talking sword, or rather, a sword with telepathic powers. The last word in modern weapons technology. The voice wasn't coming from outside, it was in his head. That's right, take your time, you'll get there in the end. It isn't every day one comes across a weapon endowed with reason. Actually, that's a contradiction in terms. Haha, no, seriously, I'm a blade made of sacred steel, forged to perfection and destined for your paw alone. Other Wolpertings wanted to take me, but I strongly urged them not to, and they all complied. I advise you to do likewise. You want me to choose something else, or you mean? Rumo queried in his head. No, stupid. To listen to my advice. Who are you calling stupid? It would be stupid to turn me down. That's all I meant. I'm a bargain. Rumo was bewildered. Uncertainly, he looked across at Urs, who was idly feeling the blade of an axe. He didn't appear to have noticed a thing. Who are you? Rumo asked. I'm poetry in motion. I'm a death wish in steel. The death being that of your enemies, of course, not yours. I'm a comrade in arms. I'm a fanfare ringing out over a corpse-strewn battlefield. I'm the triumphant cry of the victor pursuing his defeated foe. I'm. Where do you come from? From Demon Range. And how did you get here? Are you ready to hear my story? Rumo cast another glance at Urs, who was aiming a crossbow at some invisible enemies. Yes, go ahead. History of a demonic sword. Dwarf smiths forged me out of ores mined from Demon Range. I'm an alloy of petrified demons' brains and minerals from outer space. An explosive combination, my friend. My blade yearns to do battle. What are these demons of yours? I want no truck with demons. They're good demons, naturally, demons of the first water. The thing is, there was this battle between good and evil demons in Devil's Gulch. I'm sure you've heard of it. No, I haven't. You haven't? Well, never mind. It doesn't matter. It was all to do with this, golden apple that was supposed to make anyone who carried it invisible, and anyway, we fell out over this stupid apple. One insult led to another, blah, 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 and before you could say knife, a pitched battle broke out. You know where it is, Demon's Gulch. Oh, sorry. Demon's innards were spurting in all directions. It was the biggest bloodbath for, well, quite some time. The battle went on for a year. Springtime came and we hacked off each other's arms. Summer came and we skewered each other with spears. Autumn came and we riddled each other with arrows. Winter came and yes, Rumo thought impatiently. Can't you make it a bit shorter? All right, nobody really won, and in the end, all of us were dead. Ha ha. Then we were buried in Demon Range. They laid us to rest in subterranean cave. Can you imagine? All those dripping stalagmites, or should it be stalactites? No matter. Anyway, there we lay for thousands of years, turning to stone with the water dripping on our heads. Plip, plop, plip. Get it? Then suddenly crash. This meteor slammed into the mountains and crushed us all, creating the largest and most productive mine in Zamonia. Your corpse was crushed by a meteor? Yes, a gigantic meteor composed of iron straight from outer space. The result was a mixture of rock and cosmic iron, and embedded in it the crushed remains of some top-grade demons. You follow me? Then came the miners, who dug out this splendid super ore from outer space and the finest iron ore in Zamonia, if not the entire world. They kept coming across petrified demons' corpses and being superstitious and anxious to propitiate the demonic spirits. They forged a sword in honor of every corpse they discovered. They took the demons' petrified brains, pulverized them, and sprinkled the powder into the molten meteoric iron. And that's the origin of the legendary demonic swords. No idea why we're capable of thought. It must have something to do with the stuff from space. Sounds weird, doesn't it? Yoo-hoo, I'm a demonic sword. Rumo felt a heavy paw on his shoulder. He uttered a startled cry. Man, oh man, said Urs, that thing must appeal to you. You've been gawping at it for ages. I'll take it, said Rumo. That's my chosen weapon. Having left the weapons tent, Urs and Rumo allowed themselves to be swept along for a while by the jostling, shoving throng. Why did you settle on that toothpick? Urs demanded. You could have picked 100-layered sword of finest Florentine steel or something similar. Rumo decided to keep his secret to himself. What's next? He asked to change the subject. Urs paused for thought, but only briefly. We'll drink a tankard of mulled ale, or two. That would be a fitting conclusion to an eventful day, wouldn't you say? Rumo nodded. A drink he could handle. He was genuinely thirsty. A rude awakening. Even in his dreams, Rumo could hear fairground music blaring and see a grotesque procession of stilt walkers and volpeds, uglies and dwarfs. He also saw Rolla kissing and holding hands with Rolf. Volp had seized him and adorned him all over with painless scars. Urs kept falling headlong and threatening him with a bag full of mouse bladders. Then he dreamt that the little creatures living between his teeth had moved into his brain, where they erected a city just behind his eyes and between his ears. They banged and sawed away, tossed stones around, and battered his skull with sledgehammers. They forged a demonic bell out of meteoric iron and hung it in his auditory canals. Then they began to toll it. He woke up. It was the midday chimes of City Hall clock that had roused him, and merciless sunlight was streaming through his open bedroom window. His head was buzzing like beehive hats of the beasters from Honey Valley. Groaning, he got out of bed. He'd never woken up feeling so shattered, not even after his fight with Rolf. His tongue felt as if he'd left it in a bucket of ashes overnight. His teeth and tongue and gums seemed to have sprouted fur. The blood throbbed painfully in his skull, and there was a roaring in his ears like surf. Had he fallen ill for the first time in his life? Rumo tottered over to the window. Some young Wolpertings were kicking up a din in the street below. Couldn't they talk a little more quietly? He picked up the water jug and drained it in a few gulps. He tried to remember. The fair, Rolla, naturally. Urs mouse bladders, Rolf, ouch, a sharp pain in his left ear. Rolf and Rolla holding hands, they hadn't been a bad dream. What else? The uglies, that Fogar, ugh, he promptly felt sick again at the thought of it. The ghost train, what else, what else? Good morning, a cheerful voice exclaimed inside his head. Did you sleep well? You must have, the way you were snoring. He noticed only now that there was a sword lying on his table. Choose your weapon. Of course, the weapons tent. Had he really chosen this grotesque little sword? Another sharp pain, this time in the right ear. I'm genuinely sick, Rumo said to himself. Sick in the head. I'm hearing voices. He sat down on the bed with his paws over his ears. Lost your memory? Said the voice in his head. Too much mulled ale? It's me, your chosen weapon. Mulled ale. Yes, the last thing he could remember was the mulled ale stall. All those tankards he's poured down his throat on an empty stomach, drunk for the first time in his life. Yes, he could remember crawling around on all fours like a wild Wolperting. He felt ashamed. What about the painless scars tent? Was that his own voice? A warning voice in his brain? Painless scars? Brush aside the fur on your left arm and see what's written there. Ha ha. Mechanically, Rumo complied. He brushed the fur aside and froze. Someone had carved something into the skin, leaving a painless scar. It was a crimson heart with a word in the middle. Rala. There was a knock. Urs came in without waiting for an answer. He was looking all in and carrying a pot of coffee. They sat there in silence for a while, sipping their coffee. I'm afraid I did something terribly stupid last night, Urs muttered. He parted the fur on his arm. He, too, had acquired a painless scar. It read, Mouse splatters. Rumo laughed. It isn't funny. I'll have to go around with it till the day I die. Rumo held out his own arm. That's nothing. Take a look at this. He showed him the tattoo. This time it was Ur's time to laugh. What am I to do? Groaned Rumo. Propose to her, of course. Stop it. Rolla is Rolf's girlfriend. I wanted to forget her, and now this. It'll remind me of her all my life. Rolla is whose girlfriend? Rolf's, Rumo growled. They hold hands. Why shouldn't they? They're siblings. They're what? Brother and sister. Twins. From the same litter, actually. That's very rare with Wolpertings. Hadn't it ever struck you that they have the same surname? Rolf and Rolla of the Forest? Twins, Rumo said wonderingly. Yes, the miracle of life, a double helping of it. They look nothing like each other, but some twins don't. Rumo's heart gave a leap. So Rolla and Rolf were brother and sister. He couldn't help laughing again. His headache was gradually subsiding. Well, you are in a good mood this morning. That's twice you've laughed. More than you usually do in a month. Rumo put his arm around Urs and gave him a hug. By far the biggest display of emotion he'd ever shown him. Dandelion. Rumo was in high spirits. Rolf and Rala were siblings. Splendid. His headache had disappeared completely like that strange voice in his head. His sense of balance was still impaired, but that too was gradually improving. He marched through Wolperting to show off his new weapon to all and sundry, being able to dispense with a scabbard because of the slit in the blade. He'd stuck the sword in his belt. That way everyone could see it. Rumo's first weapon. He paused outside the tailor's shop to inspect himself and his sword in the big mirror beside the door. Snazzy, huh? Rumo gave a start. You'd better get used to it, that's the way I sound. It all came back in a flash. The talking sword, the buried demons, the meteor. It hadn't been a dream. Yes, it's a crazy story. No wonder you thought you were losing your mind. But be thankful it isn't a metabolic disorder of the brain. If it were, you'd have to spend the rest of the day barking or talking backwards or something. Haha. This is terrible, thought Rumo. I mean, fancy hearing a sword jabbering in my head all the time. Don't be like that. You choose your weapon. It was a sacred act, a bond between flesh and steel. We're partners forever, you and I. What's your name, by the way? Mine is Dandelion. Dandelion? Asked Rumo, like the flower. I was thinking more of the origin of the word. It's French. Dandelion. Lion's tooth. Something sharp and dangerous. You mean there's a flower of the same name? Yes. A poisonous flower? No, you can even make a salad out of it, I believe. What nonsense! Dandelion felt silent for a while. What do they call you at home? Rumo. Like the card game? Yes. Ha ha ha. Rumo continued to study his reflection. Yes, the sword suited him. It talked a bit too much, that was all. Hi there, Rumo. Hi there, Dandelion. Rumo walked along the street with Dandelion. Three girl Wolpertings whom Rumo knew from school were coming the other way. He gave them a clumsy wave. They giggled and waved back. Rumo and his new knife, said Dandelion. No wonder they are stirred. Knife, did you say? I thought you were a sword. Knife, sword, the borderline is pretty vague. Just a minute, Rumo halted. Yesterday you claimed to be a mighty, demonic sword. Did I say demonic sword? Well, I meant knife. Yoo-hoo, I'm a mighty demonic knife. Rumo walked on. It's not the same, he said. That spiel of mine yesterday was sales talk, stupid. Have you any idea how long I'd been lying there? Yesterday was my 25th annual fair. I mean, I'm a knife. What fool would choose a knife when he could have a battle axe or a sword? I had to think of something. Rumo paused again. You mean you bamboozled me? What? No. Hey, all I did was use a bit of persuasion so you'd make the right choice at last, which you did. That proves I was right, doesn't it? Rumo failed to follow Dandelion's reasoning. You said you were a sword, and now you're only a knife. Well, I mean, what's the difference between a knife and a sword? Between a big knife and a little sword? Where do knives stop and swords begin? Who can say? I certainly can't. Go on lying to me, and I'll chuck you in the river. Hey, don't do anything rash. Dandelion's voice took on a deep, solemn note. This is a great moment. Don't profane it. You and I, partners in battle, a Wolperting's arm plus a steel blade capable of thought. Could there be a greater or more dangerous weapon? Rumo pondered this. Or let's say you were blinded in battle. Stranger things have happened. With me in your fist, you could go on fighting with your eyes shut. You mean you can see? In all directions, but don't ask me how. I can see without eyes myself, with my nose, with my ears. You can? In all directions, but don't ask me how. Aha, all right, another point. I can not only read your thoughts, I could read an opponent's. I would know all his maneuvers in advance. Is that true? It's true, the voice murmured hypnotically in Rumo's head. Hey, hang on, cried Rumo. That's another of your tricks. No, I can prove it to you. How? How? Yes, how? Wait, I've got it. Do you by any chance have a score to settle with someone? I certainly have. Does he possess a sword or something similar? Plenty of them. He's the best swordsman in the city. All the better. Now listen. If we teach the fellow a lesson together, will that convince you we're partners for life? Perhaps. Then take me to him. The fencing master. Ushan Beluga was feeling fine. Having just risen from his bed after 12 hours refreshing sleep, he'd consumed a whole pot of coffee and breakfasted on 8 fried eggs. It's grand simply to be alive, he thought. I feel like an ice-cold shower followed by a brisk workout in my fencing garden. This was far from being Ushan's usual state of mind. He was known to be not only the finest swordsman in the city, but subject to the most extreme mood swings. There was no medical reason for these moods. Their origin was meteorological. Ushan de Luca was peculiarly sensitive to weather conditions. "What sort of day is it going to be, Ushan?" people would ask him as he walked through the city. Ushan would put a paw over his eyes, stick his nose in the air, sniff, and say, for example, "There's a barometric low over the Zemonian Ocean. It's moving eastwards in the direction of the barometric high centered on Zemonia itself, but it doesn't yet show any tendency to skirt this or no, this to the north. The isotherms and isothers are behaving as they should. The air temperature bears a normal relationship to the annual mean. The temperature prevailing in the coldest and warmest months, and a periodic monthly variation in temperature. The water vapor in the air is at a maximal buoyancy, and humidity is low. In other words, it's going to be a fine day." And one could safely stake the whole of one's worldly wealth on the accuracy of that forecast. Ushan found the slightest change in the weather a terrible affliction. He felt as if electrical storms were raging through his cerebral cortex, as if his eardrums were being pierced by red-hot needles, and his eye sockets filled with boiling water. The purple pouches that blossomed beneath his eyes seemed to be laden with lead shot. His forehead became a mountain range of melancholy furrows. When the barometer registered extremely low pressure, his face contorted into such a tragic mask that people felt like bursting into tears at the very sight of him, and his pet cat took to his heels, hissing and snarling. On such occasions Ushan found life pure agony and yearned for death. His first wife, Urla de Luca, née Florentiana, had left him because she couldn't endure his erratic moods any longer. "He spends the whole time sitting on the window sill on the top floor of our home, talking to the urn in which he wants his ashes buried," she testified before the mayor when suing for divorce. "It drives me around the bend because I'm afraid he's going to jump at any moment. As for that face of his, he's a nice enough fellow when the sun's shining, but I can't take any more of this. I mean, I got to know him in the springtime, but when autumn came, today Ushan couldn't have felt better. Zemonia was in the middle of a stable high-pressure area. The sun was shining and there was scarcely a breath of wind. He was sitting up high in his tower, overlooking the fencing school, leafing through the latest circular from the Zemonian Fencing Instructors Association. The doorbell rang. Ushan gave a start. He wasn't expecting visitors. The school was closed today because of the annual fair. He opened the window and looked down. Rumo was standing below. Rumo of Zemonia. "Hello, Rumo," called Ushan. "This is an unexpected pleasure. What can I do for you?" "I've come to challenge you to a duel." "Eh? I've come? You heard what I said. Are you out of your mind, youngster? Is this a schoolboy prank? Are your classmates hiding around the corner and laughing themselves sick? I've come to challenge you to a duel." "Duel," Rumo repeated gravely. Ushan could see the whole area from his tower. There was no one in sight but Rumo. "Go home, Rumo," he called. "We'll see each other in class." He shut the window. The youngster always got out of hand when the fair was in progress. Shaking his head, he resumed his seat. The doorbell rang again. Ushan flung the window open. "What is it now? I've come to challenge you to a duel." "I can't duel with my pupils. Go away." "Then you're a coward." "All right, so I'm a coward. Push off." Ushan really was in a good mood. Under normal circumstances, he would long ago have gone downstairs and given Rumo a hiding with the flat of his sword. He shut the window again. "He won't play," thought Rumo. "What now?" "What is his weak spot?" asked Dandelion. "His weak spot? I don't think he's got one. Everyone has. Not him. He's Ushan de Luca, the finest swordsman." "You mean his name is Ushan de Luca? Like that brand of rum?" "Ha ha, that's great." Dandelion chuckled malevolently. "What's so great about it?" "Well, it's like being called booze bottle or eggnog. There must be a reason." Rumo still didn't get it. "Listen, ask him the following." Rumo rang the bell for a third time. The window flew open. "Oh, well," Rumo called, "I suppose there's nothing to be done. Perhaps it's just too early in the day. Perhaps you're still too sober to fight." Ushan stopped short. "What do you mean?" "Oh, nothing. Perhaps you simply haven't taken enough Dutch courage on board to fight me." "Sorry to have bothered you." Rumo turned to go. "Stay there." Ushan drew himself up, straight as a ramrod. His tone was sharp and authoritative. He threw the key down. Meet me in the fencing garden. Ushan DeLuca's fencing garden. There were there a heaven for the exclusive use of aficionados of the art of fencing. It would have looked like Ushan DeLuca's fencing garden, which was conceived in accordance with 7 rules. Ushan had designed it himself, worked on it for 10 years, and helped its construction. Having considered it almost complete for the past 2 years, he now confined himself to maintaining it with the aid of a couple of gardeners. While waiting for his fencing master, Rumo strolled round the garden and admired the ingenious diversity of its various features. He knew the 7 rules for constructing an ideal fencing garden a la Ushan DeLuca from the latter's book Swordsmanship. Rule number 1 for the creation of an ideal fencing garden a la Ushan DeLuca. Fencers like to move around. This apparent platitude was actually the basis of the fencing garden. Fencers like moving around in the wildest variety of ways. That, for example, was why Ushan had erected an unfinished stone wall that traversed the garden like an ancient ruin and was now picturesquely weathered. The wall was low enough to leap onto, narrow enough to require a good sense of balance, and long enough to accommodate 2 swordsmen. Ushan had also transported tree trunks of different sizes into the garden and allowed them to become overgrown with vegetation. He had commissioned Ort el Okro to build some massive tables. For some reason, swordsmen like to jump onto tables when fighting, and dug pits and trenches. He had even excavated tunnels and erected wooden beams for climbing on and swinging from on ropes. Rule number 2 for the creation of an ideal fencing garden, a la Ushan DeLuca. Swordsmen are vain. The garden was equipped with a number of large mirrors in which Ushan and his pupils could watch themselves shadow fencing. Countless candles supplied atmospheric lighting for duels at night, and capes hung ready to hand. From clothes horses or swordsmen in combat looked best when attired in following capes, especially in red velvet ones. For the vainest of the vain, gilded rapiers and epées were available. Rule number 3 for the creation of an ideal fencing garden, a la Ushan DeLuca. Swordsmen love danger. So as to intensify his fencing garden's hazards and dangers, Ushan had incorporated numerous hidden traps. Nooses and holes in the ground designed to trip swordsmen up, branches that sprang back and hit them in the face, pitfalls that suddenly yawned beneath their feet, concealed wires strung between the trees. He devised additional hazards every day, and his ingenious gardeners were under orders to go on constructing new obstacles of whose location and function he himself was ignorant. Rule number 4 for the creation of an ideal fencing garden. A la Ushan DeLuca, swordsmen are hopeless romantics. There had, of course, to be a bower of blood-red roses for swordsmen to decapitate with their blades as they danced past, likewise a pond inhabited by a black swan, and spanned by a picturesque bridge for them to duel on in fine weather. There was also a lush meadow filled with grazing sheep that provided a peaceful contrast to the combatants. And needless to say, the pond had to contain a plump old carp of melancholy mien, with which Ushan could, when the barometric pressure was low, conduct mute conversations about the futility of existence. Rule number 5. For the creation of an ideal fencing garden a la Ushan DeLuca, steps and stairs are indispensable. Swordsmen like nothing better than to fight on stairs. There was a spiral iron staircase, a flight of rickety wooden steps leading up on one side of a gable end and down the other, a stone staircase culminating in a tunnel, and some marble steps that ended in a void. But the finest stairway of all, which was constructed of ebony, led to the summit of a big oak tree, in whose gnarled branches fighting could continue. Rule number 6 for the creation of an ideal fencing garden, a la Ushan DeLuca, swordsmen fight anywhere. Indoors or outdoors, in daylight or in darkness, snow or rain, swordsmen had to fight in all conditions, and Ushan had taken great pains to equip his garden perfectly in this respect. Situated in the middle of the garden was a small house, or rather a dummy house with only one door and no windows. It contained an ingenious little labyrinth with staircases that led nowhere and passages that turned out to be dead ends. This was where pupils were trained to fight in cramped conditions, in poor light or none at all. Behind the house was a walkway of burnished metal, lubricated with soft soap. for simulating combat on stretches of ice. Pupils were also taught defense on the thunder sheet, a rectangle of sheet metal suspended from 4 trees. This emitted an ear-splitting din whenever you took a step. Ushan knew that acoustic disturbances could also affect the outcome of a contest. What else did his garden have to offer? The usual swordsman dummies, wooden figures to be assailed with rapier or saber. By virtue of the lubricant machinery inside them, many of these contrivances could actually hit back. Finally, there were the weapons: rapiers, sabers, epées, swords, cudgels of all kinds. These were stuck in the ground or embedded in tree trunks, suspended from branches or neatly arrayed in racks. Ushan DeLuca's garden was his paradise on earth for lovers of fencing. Rule number 7. For the creation of an ideal fencing garden, a la Ushan DeLuca, no ideal fencing garden, a la Ushan DeLuca, exists. Ushan would dearly have liked to incorporate some features of a more dangerous kind, but the fact that his pupils trained in the garden imposed certain limitations on him. He dreamt of pitfalls lined with spears, of lethal quicksands and carnivorous fish, of poisonous thorns and nests of strangle snakes. These visions were not, alas, compatible with the school syllabus, so he deferred them until his retirement. The duel. Rumo was impressed by the garden's refinements. He itched to vent his rage on Ushan and in the Spencer's paradise. At the same time, however, he began to wonder if it was really such a good idea to challenge him on his own territory. Dandelion intruded on his thoughts. Hey, you're being pessimistic again. It's the wrong attitude. You must think how you're going to defeat him. How you slice off his head, stick it on the end of a spear, and carry it through the streets singing. How you'll cut out his heart. And hang on, Rumo broke in. It won't be that kind of victory. No? No. I only want to pay him back for what he did to me, and needle him a bit, maybe. I see, a pity, but never mind. How do you propose to needle him? Not having given the matter any thought, Rumo hesitated. He'd never needled anyone before. How about this? After we've cunningly disarmed him and he's crawling around in the dust at your feet, you'll say, well, enjoying a taste of your own medicine, fencing master, or should I say ex-fencing master, because I suppose I'm the new municipal fencing champion? That sounds good, said Rumo. He tried to memorize the words. Or this, well, Ushan, you old soak, looks like you've had your... Rumo, Ushan DeLuca's voice rang out across the garden like a whiplash. Rumo gave a start. He turned to see his teacher, hurrying towards him with a resolute tread and a face like thunder. Ushan halted just in front of him and looked him full in the eye. You wanted to fight me? Here I am. You begged me for a thrashing at your service. Choose yourself a weapon. I already have one, said Rumo, brandishing Dandelion. You prefer to fight with a cheese knife? Steady on, Dandelion protested. This definitely isn't your day, my boy, Ushan went on. Sure you aren't sick, or did you indulge in some foolishness at the fair? Certain irresponsible individuals there have been selling illegal drugs to juveniles, so I've heard. I'm fine, I want to fight. Rumo was determined to get the business over. That's right, Dandelion whispered in his head. Stand firm. Suit yourself. Ushan plucked out one of the many swords embedded in the ground beside them. I'll take this if it's all right with you. Are you sure you wouldn't prefer a weapon from my vast selection? They're the finest of blades in Zamonia. I'm sure, said Rumo. Ushan strode firmly on ahead. We usually start off in the middle of the garden and see how the fight develops. Swordsmanship isn't an exact science. We'll have to see where chance takes us. It certainly won't be far. He halted in the midst of the felled trees. Dozens of massive logs were lying every which way, deep in grass and overgrown with moss and ivy. My tree cemetery, said Ushan. Be careful how you leap around on these logs. They can be pretty slippery. The gravity of the situation hadn't diminished his concern for a pupil's welfare. He turned, raised his sword, and kissed the hilt. Rumo raised his weapon likewise, but he balked at kissing Dandelion. On guard, said Ushan. On guard, said Rumo. On guard, whispered Dandelion. The two combatants brought their blades together with a crash. Sparks flew and Dandelion's twin points vibrated like a tuning fork. They stood there with their weapons crossed. Dandelion, thought Rumo, what shall I do? No answer. What does he have in mind, Dandelion? Can you read his thoughts? No answer. Dandelion? Ushan tapped Rumo's weapon with the tip of his sword. So you aren't attacking right away, eh? You've learned something since the last time. Very good. Rumo hadn't attacked because he was paralyzed with indecision. What was the matter with Dandelion? Why didn't he answer? He'd gone up against Simonia's finest swordsman armed with a forked knife. because Dandelion had claimed to be able to predict his opponent's every move, and now Dandelion had fallen silent. Dandelion? Still no answer. Well, we could stand around like this all day, Ushan said, but it wouldn't achieve anything. I'd better open the proceedings. He subjected Rumo to a twin attack, a standard item from his repertoire designed to impress beginners without undue effort. He let the sword dangle for a moment loose-wristed, then slashed at Rumo from every angle so swiftly that it seemed two blades were at work, and darted forward at the same time. Rumo retreated, but he parried the blows with equal rapidity. He was familiar with the twin attack and the corresponding defense. It was one of the first things Urs had taught him. Dandelion, he thought, answer me. What does he plan to do next? No response. Ushan stopped short, thwarted by Rumo's well-rehearsed reaction, and promptly changed tactics. With a single bound, he leapt onto a log and rained blows on Rumo from above. But Urs had known a simple response to that one, too. Rumo went down on one knee, out of Ushan's range, and aimed some scything blows at his legs and compelled him to perform a brisk dance routine. Ushan somersaulted backwards off the log and faced Rumo once more. Been practicing in secret, eh? Ushan panted. Poor style, but quite effective. It reminds me of someone. Rumo was still too bemused to realize that he was putting up a pretty good show against Ushan. Dandelion, he thought desperately. Where are you? Still no answer. All right, let's stop this beginner's nonsense and go all out, said Ushan. We'll see how that appeals to you. The Raging Tornado. His next routine was the Raging Tornado, in which the attacking swordsman rotated swiftly on the spot, alternately clockwise and anti-clockwise, and delivered blows with the maximum frequency. This wasn't amateur stuff, it was a complicated procedure that called for a great deal of training. Steel rang against steel several times a second, with a sound like a handbell tumbling down a flight of stairs. Continually forced to readjust his position by a flurry of immensely powerful blows, the opponent was thrown off his stride and deprived of any chance to launch attacks of his own. The fencing instructor advanced on his retreating pupil like a whirlwind, spinning as he came. What do you do if a tornado bears down on you? Urs asked when the raging tornado tactic came up for discussion and training. No idea, Rumo had replied. You take cover if you can find any. It's as simple as that. Defending yourself against a tornado is futile. Find yourself a stout roof and get beneath it. If you can't find one, it's curtains. A stout roof, Rumo continued to parry Ushan's blows as he looked around for one. He caught sight of a massive wooden table. Did that count as a roof? No matter. He slipped beneath it, and the metallic clatter ceased at once. Ushan was dumbfounded. He'd been compelled to break off his attack by an act of cowardice. Hiding under a table? He cried. You call that swordsmanship? Is there any rule against it? Rumo retorted. There aren't any rules in swordsmanship. In that case, said Rumo, I do call it swordsmanship. He stayed where he was. Ushan was completely thrown by this. He thrashed the tabletop with the flat of his sword. Come out of there, or must I smote you out? He bent down and tried to prod Rumo with his sword point, but Rumo, who had already emerged on the far side and leapt up on the tabletop, attacked him from above. Ushan sprang back out of range. For the first time in his career as a fencing instructor, a pupil had forced him to give ground. Rumo jumped down from the table. Ushan stood straight as a ramrod with his blade lowered. The tip was ever so slightly trembling, Rumo noticed. You're a nice youngster, said Ushan, trying to sound conciliatory. Let's stop this before I really have to hurt you. Do you surrender? Asked Rumo. What? Do you apologize? I'll spare you if you do. Are you insane? I'm giving you a chance to end this before things get out of hand. I could wound you. Or I you. Impossible. Rumo was surprised by his own self-assurance. His sword had lost its voice, but so what? He needed no talking sword to put paid to a legendary but aging swordsman. Urs had taught him the requisite fundamentals. The ambition he supplied himself, it was the way it had been in Ort El Okro's workshop. You didn't need umpteen years of experience to make a chair. All you needed was guts. Ushan was pondering his future strategy. For a start, he would like to take it a bit easier. The youngster was welcome to wear himself out. The belief that one's energy is inexhaustible was a misapprehension typical of the young. He would dance around instead. Rumo was thinking hard, too. Don't go all out from the start, Urs had always told him. It's a typical greenhorn's mistake to squander your energy before the balloon really goes up. Dance around a bit between times. So Rumo and Ushan danced. They might have been performing a carefully rehearsed pas de deux as they cavorted across the fencing garden's meadow, causing the sheep to bleat in alarm and the pigeons to take wing. Ushan casually beheaded a rose as they passed the rose arbor. Rumo tried to follow suit but missed. Ha! Ushan exclaimed. Practice makes perfect. I'm not interested in looking good, Rumo retorted, only in winning. The artificial ruin. It amounts to the same thing, said Ushan, coming to a halt. Rumo stopped fighting too. They had now reached the artificial ruin, so you've also learned to husband your strength. Ushan went on. Who in Wolperton could have taught you that, apart from me? Rumo didn't reply. What about fighting in a confined space? Have you mastered that yet? Ushan disappeared in a decrepit-looking building. Rumo reluctantly followed him inside. No, he hadn't yet practiced that with Urs. The conditions really were cramped. A small, windowless room, the ceiling so low that he had to duck his head. The only source of light, 2 candles on the floor. Ushan wasn't in there. Rumo, he heard Ushan calling from somewhere. He made his way into the next room, which was even smaller and lit by 1 candle. Some garden tools, rakes, besoms were propped against the wall in one corner. Rumo into the next room. This one was totally unilluminated, and there, with his back to the wall, stood Ushan DeLuca. He was lurking, an almost invisible figure in the gloom. Eager to beat him to it, Rumo attacked him head on. Their blades met, but no! It wasn't steel that Dandelion's blade encountered. There was a clatter, and Ushan's figure collapsed in a shower of broken glass. Rumo had attacked his own reflection in a mirror. Rumo! Clearly the whole sole purpose of this building was to frighten and infuriate pupils so much that they rushed blindly from room to room, only to be ambushed somewhere in the dark. So Rumo tried to keep calm. He ascended a creaking flight of stairs. Very slowly he entered the room at the top. It was in total darkness, but his sense of smell, which was now in operation, told him that it was empty. Careful not to stumble, he stole cautiously across the uneven floorboards, took one long, slow stride forward, and trod on thin air. He turned a somersault and landed on his back, but the slope was so steep that he promptly turned another. He fell head over heels down the darkened chute and collided with a wooden door, which opened under his weight. Dazzling daylight greeted him as he came tumbling out of a hatch at the back of the house and landed in some tall grass. Feels good to be out in the fresh air again, eh? Ushan DeLuca had been waiting for him. He was standing amid the daisies eating an apple. Rumo scrambled to his feet. Had enough at last? Ushan inquired. Shouldn't we simply leave it at that? There was an expectant note in his voice. No, Rumo wouldn't have stopped for anything in the world. Every fiber of his being yearned to continue the fight. As for Ushan, he had to admit that he would have been disappointed if Rumo had given up at this stage. I'd prefer to fight on, Rumo said politely. As you wish, said Ushan. Relieved, he tossed the apple core away. Well, think of this as a swordsman's fairground filled with different attractions. What shall we do next? Fight on the ice track? Duel on the staircase? The choice is yours. Let's just carry on as we were, Rumo suggested. Swordsmanship isn't an exact science. Let's see where the chance takes us. He actually thinks he can beat me, thought Ushan, secretly amused. Ah, the boundless self-confidence of youth. Rumo launched a lightning attack. Ushan parried it and retreated. A second onslaught followed, even faster and more ferocious than the first. Ushan retreated still further. He couldn't afford to let this youngster dictate the tempo. The fencing tree. Ushan danced backward, steadily making for the stairway that led up into the great oak tree. He darted up the first few steps with Rumo in hot pursuit, then turned to hold him off. Slowly and deliberately he backed up the stairway step by step, alertly parrying Rumo's blows as he went. Sure enough, the youngster was falling into his trap. When Ushan felt the first leaves trickle the nape of his neck, he leapt boldly off the stairway and onto a massive branch. Follow me, he said, and I could cut you to ribbons. You could never jump across land and find a foothold and defend yourself at the same time. So I'll take a breather. He drove the tip of his sword into the thick bark at his feet. Thanks, said Rumo, and jumped across. His feet had scarcely landed when Ushan plucked his sword out of the branch and showered him with blows. Each of them could have been lethal, but Ushan was going through the motions. Meanwhile, Rumo was striving to retain his balance. Ushan lowered his blade. A word of advice: never accept a favor in combat, and never grant one either. Reserve your charity for other occasions. Rumo glanced around. He was in a tricky position, but the tree was equipped with ropes and leather handholds that offered plenty of scope for climbing, swinging, and hanging on. He clung to a branch and lashed out at his opponent. Ushan countered, and for a while the battle raged this way and that. Ushan had tailored the tree to his own requirements and provided it with a multitude of cunning refinements that had driven many people to distraction before now. He seized a rope, cried "Hopla!" swung himself over a thick branch, and disappeared into a dense mass of foliage. Rumo cautiously followed. Where had his fencing master gone? Rumo could scent him, but Ushan, concealed by all the greenery, kept changing his position. "I shall now proceed to kill you 7 times over, my boy," whispered Ushan. "Carry on," Rumo retorted. 1. Ushan's blade darted from the leaves, aimed at a point midway between Rumo's ears. 2. This time the blade came from below, passing close beneath his armpit. 3. The blade stopped a hair's breadth from Rumo's left eye, and promptly withdrew into the leaves. He seemed to be fencing with the tree itself, from which blades were sprouting everywhere. 4. Ushan tapped Rumo's chest with his sword point, just over the heart. He chuckled at his place of concealment. 5, 6, 7. Rumo cried furiously, slashing at the foliage 3 times in quick succession. Hundreds of severed leaves went fluttering down. Ushan could now be seen clutching on a branch, looking as startled as a puppeteer whose curtain has been wrenched aside. "Those twigs will take a year to grow back," Ushan said reproachfully. "Have a little more respect for an innocent tree." Rumo lunged at him. By the time his leading foot had trodden on a piece of bark that emitted a suspicious creak, it was too late. A branch lashed him in the face and chest. He swayed for a moment, flailing his arms, then toppled over backwards and fell into the long grass below. "Disaster always strikes from an unexpected quarter," Ushan jeered from overhead as Rumo struggled to his feet with a groan. The fencing master climbed down off his branch. There was another creak, and he looked up just in time to see a bulging leather punch bag come swinging out of a dense foliage. It struck him in the chest with a dull thud, lifted him off his feet, and sent him sailing through the air. He landed in the grass a few feet from Rumo. Rumo tottered over to Ushan to see if he was still alive. Ushan sat up and stared at him, glassy-eyed. "That was a surprise gift from my gardener," he said, feeling his chest for broken ribs. "Disaster always strikes from an unexpected quarter," said Rumo. Groaning, Ushan got to his feet. "If I'd known what an unalloyed pleasure this would be," he said, leaning on his sword, "I wouldn't have been so reluctant to cross blades with you. I haven't had a good fight since my last duel with Urs of the Snows. Do you know him?" Rumo looked away. Ushan leveled his sword at him. "Aha, so that's the answer. We've been practicing in secret, have we? I thought Urs had renounced cold steel for good. We used wooden swords." Ushan lowered his blade with a grin. "All right, youngster, don't you agree with me that this would be a suitable moment to end these proceedings? We've both had some fun. You learned something, and you've shown me what you're made of. From now on, I shall treat you with respect in class. Do you surrender?" Ushan put his paw on his hips. "I don't believe it. You mean you still haven't had enough? You told me never to accept a favor from an opponent. I don't want preferential treatment. I want to beat you." "You stubborn little brute," cried Ushan. Rumo took guard. The wrist slapper. Ushan deliberated. Tempers were now running so high that serious injuries might result. It was his duty as a teacher to bring this affair to a swift conclusion, but how? With a two-handed slice? That could split an opponent's skull in half. Far too dangerous. A grim reaper? This horizontal blow owed its name not only to its scything motion, but also to the fact that it spelt certain death. Too risky. Wait, a wrist slapper. That was it. That was how he defeated Urs of the Snows, who had never touched a blade since. It was a powerful and, as a rule, immensely effective blow that only a few expert swordsmen had mastered, but it wasn't lethal. That would bring Rumo down to earth and ensure that he attended class with due humility from now on. Delivered with the flat of the blade and great force, the wrist slapper was an extremely painful blow on the opponent's sword arm. It had to strike the appropriate nerve without damaging it, thereby paralyzing the arm for a considerable time. Rumo would have to spoon up his soup left-handed for the next few days. Ushan attacked. "Oh ho," thought Rumo, "he's trying the wrist slapper." Urs, who had often told him about the wrist slapper, seemed positively obsessed by it. He had devised an effective defense against the blow, and more than that, a method of humiliating anyone who delivered it. He had practiced this with Rumo for days on end. Rumo began doing what Ushan expected of him. He allowed himself to be maneuvered into the required position and obediently left his forearm undefended. Ushan took a swing at it and slapped thin air. Rumo had whipped away his arm, simultaneously transferring his weapon to the other paw in a simple changeover. Thrown slightly off balance, Ushan received a swinging blow on the ear from the flat of Rumo's sword. Urs called this the wrist slapper riposte. Ushan's head rang like a bell and his ear felt red hot. Tears sprang to his eyes. "Best regards from Urs," said Rumo. He couldn't help grinning. The needling process was going well. Ushan stood there like a first-year student who had just been slapped by his teacher. This youngster was more than a pupil, he decided. He was a fully fledged opponent. No more allowances for youth and inexperience. No more schoolmasterly solicitude. It was definitely time for a multiple DeLuca. Ushan plucked his second sword from a wooden rack. Leaning backwards slightly with both blades leveled from the hip, he slowly retreated in defensive posture so as to lure Rumo out of his shell. "You mean you now need 2 weapons to deal with me?" asked Rumo. Needling was fun, he told himself. 2 swords versus a cheese knife? He launched several fierce attacks. Ushan parried them two-handed. The multiple DeLuca. The first phase of a multiple DeLuca, a tactic devised and perfected by Ushan himself, required the swordsman to fight with 2 weapons and then suddenly discard one. For no apparent reason, Ushan had hurled his left-hand sword into the air. Numerous variations of the multiple DeLuca could be performed. There was the triple, the quintuple, the octuple, the 17-fold, the 22-fold. It all depended on how often the weapon turned over after being thrown into the air. 1 turn, 2, 3, 4, 5. Meanwhile, fighting on the ground continued. Rumo redoubled his attacks now that Ushan had discarded one of his weapons. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Ushan stopped retreating and tried to stand his ground against Rumo's onslaught. It was important not to let him force the pace. 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 28 rotations were the most Ushan had ever achieved. This feat had been necessary because he was fighting the reigning champion of Zamonia, Artrax Zarta III, one of the most nerve-wracking duels in his career, and it had matched him with the opponent who required special measures, like Rumo. 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25. It was particularly important when performing the multiple DeLuca to ensure that your opponent forgot all about the discarded weapon. The higher you threw it, the more often it rotated, the harder you fought in the meantime, the greater the chances that this complicated ploy would succeed. Ushan now attacked, drawing on his full range of skills. Rumo was bombarded with cuts and thrusts from all angles and directions, delivered at a speed he had never encountered before. It escaped his notice that he was being driven around in a circle. 30, 31, 32. Reaching its apogee, Ushan's sword slowly rotated for the last time. 35. Ushan had never before thrown such a high DeLuca. The sword came to a stop in midair, then plummeted earthwards, heavy hilt first. The essential thing at the conclusion of a multiple DeLuca was to be back where it had started, skillfully maneuvered there by Ushan. He and Rumo were on that exact spot. Rumo was far too preoccupied to notice the portent of disaster bearing down on him from above. With mathematical precision, Ushan's second sword landed in the midst of his hurricane of cuts and thrusts, flying sparks and whirling blades. To Rumo's astonishment, Ushan caught it by the hilt in front of his nose. Suddenly confronted again by 2 weapons instead of 1, Rumo stopped short. His sword arm remained immobile for a fraction of a second, and Ushan seized his opportunity. Clamping Rumo's blade between both of his, he levered it out of his grasp with one swift, irresistible movement. The self-styled demonic sword went flying across the fencing garden and embedded itself quivering in the trunk of a silver birch. "Ouch!" said Dandelion in sight of Rumo's head. Ushan held his sword points to Rumo's throat. The duel was over. "Now go home," said Ushan. Without wasting a second glance on his defeated opponent, he stuck his swords in the ground and left the garden with his cloak fluttering behind him. "And don't forget your cheese knife," he called before disappearing into the house. Suddenly it all came back, the headache, the befuddlement, the stale taste in his mouth. Rumo felt as if he had just woken up with a monumental hangover. He was wandering aimlessly through the side streets of Wolperting. Fairground music could be heard in the distance. Well, how did it go? Dandelion asked suddenly. Rumo was too flabbergasted to be angry. Dandelion, where have you been all this time? No idea, to be honest. I must have passed out or something. Did you know that swords can faint? Neither did I, haha. I only came round when I struck into that tree. Did I miss anything? You fainted? Yes, right at the start of the fight. His sword came whistling towards me, and we met with a terrible crash. You left me in the lurch, Rumo protested. You talked me into that business and passed out at the crucial moment. Heavens, how callous of you. I'm still in shock. That was my very first fight, for goodness sake. I didn't know everything happened so quickly. Phew, the speed of it. Can you imagine what it feels like crashing into another blade? Did you see the sparks? Call yourself a sword, Rumo said scornfully. You're a joke. I'm a knife, Dandelion said peevishly. Oh, so you are a knife after all. What of it? Do you think that means I've got no feelings? A knife with feelings, a knife that passes out, just what I need in a fight, a tent full of weapons, and I had to pick you. I might as well go into battle armed with a tulip. Do you know what you are? You're just a Dandelion's confession. Shall I tell you what I really am? Shall I? All right, I will. Rumo came to a halt. The truth is, Dandelion said in a quavering voice, I'm not a demon's brain at all. I'm a troll's brain. A troglotroll's brain. There, now you know. You're a troll? Certainly, a common or garden troglotroll, a cave dweller. I never wielded a sword in my life. I was mining lapis lazuli in a mine shaft in the demon range when that stupid meteor came crashing down. The most awe-inspiring weapon I ever had in my hands was a geologist's hammer. The meteor made such a mess of me, they must have mistaken me for a demonic warrior and poured my brain into the sword. At least, that's the only explanation I can think of for how I got into this confounded thing. You mean you aren't even a demonic warrior? You're only a troll? I used to be. Better and better. First of all, a mighty demonic sword, and now just a troglotrollian toothpick. That settles it. I'm throwing you into the river. What? Rumo strode on. Hey, where are you going? To the Wolper. I'm going to throw you in. Rumo, don't be rash. Rumo didn't reply. He was making for the bridge. Rumo, you can't be serious. No response. Rumo, don't do anything you'll regret. Rumo strode on regardless. Rumo, listen to me, Rumo. I bungled it, for heaven's sake. I made a little wholly unrepresentative mistake. It was my first fight. Calm down. We can discuss this quietly later. Rumo had reached the northern end of Wolper Bridge. Dandelion's voice was drowned by the roar of the river. Rumo, it'll never happen again. I give you my word of honor. I won't let it. Are you listening to me, Rumo? Rumo went over to the parapet and looked down at the rushing waters of the Wolper. He dangled Dandelion over the edge. Rumo, Dandelion shrieked. This isn't funny any more. You're right, said Rumo. It isn't. He took another look at the river. Something was drifting past on its turbid surface. A bundle of clothes? No, a Wolperting. He could even make out the face. It was Rolla's. Without a second thought, Rumo stuck Dandelion in his belt and leapt over the parapet into the raging torrent. Oh, that's right. I just have to check something. Oops. What? I don't understand what happened. I lost my place. Oh my goodness. I just didn't get it. No. Okay, I don't understand what's going on with my nook, but I've lost my place. No, no, I've lost my place. Mm. Okay, I'm closer to where I was now. Rala's story. The long journey that ended with Rala's immersion in the icy waters in the Wolper had begun at the farm, where Nidog and the Bloodum had beaten her senseless before her brother's eyes. It was a journey from one perilous state in which she had been more dead than alive to another. Death had been her constant companion, her unseen attendant and lover, ever ready to enfold her in its chill embrace. Her journey had acquainted her with friendship, but also with hatred and vengeance, and the thrill of the chase and the pleasures of flirting with danger. She had learned to speak and walk erect. She had been reunited with her brother Rolf, but the best thing she had encountered on her journey was the love of Talon the bear god. Once Nidhogg the Bloodum had convinced that he had beaten Ralla to death, he dragged her supposedly lifeless body into the forest as a sacrifice to the wild bear god in whom he believed. As soon as he had laid her down among the leaves and returned to his farm to give Rolf a thrashing, the wild bear god appeared. Talon the wild bear god. His name was Talon, Talon the Claw to be precise. He was wild and a bear, yes, but he wasn't a god. Talon was as far from being a god as anyone could be. He wasn't particularly bright, he was lazy, he possessed no supernatural powers, and he was as mortal as any other creature in the forest. He lived on scraps, and the superstitious peasants threw out to placate him when he roared in the night. Talon would eat anything: cold potatoes, apple peels, stale bread, moldy cheese, even dead dogs, just as long as he didn't have to hunt his own food. Talon trotted over, sniffed the little puppy's bodies, and promptly decided not to eat it under any circumstances. Why not? Because it was still alive. Talon knew nothing of the demonicals, still less of their predilection for live food, but instinct told him that he was one of the Simonian life forms, which firmly rejected any form of nourishment that was still moving. Yes, Rala was still alive. As for her name, she got that from Talon, who nursed her back to health and brought her food and lulled her to sleep with the only two syllables he could articulate: Rala, Rala, Rala. She recovered from her serious injuries remarkably quickly, reached the fast-growing phase, and became big and strong. Not as big as Talon, but strong enough to go hunting with him, for now that he had a foster child to feed, he no longer shrank from killing his own food. Rala, he thought, should have something better to eat than kitchen waste and dead dogs. Besides, he had noticed that the exercise did him good, and he lost a few pounds, so hunting became his and Rala's main interest in life. One day they scented an unusual quarry. Having run it to earth with a snow-covered clearing, they saw that it was a hunter, not just any hunter, but the one who had caught Rala and Rolv and sold them to Nidiv. Rala knew this from the scent when they came face to face. The hunter was carrying a long stick in his right hand and a short stick in his left. Having put the two together, he seemed to point them at Rala and Talon. Suddenly, the short stick flew through the air and struck Talon in the heart. He sank to the forest floor, growled Rala for the last time, and died. The hunter had meantime produced another short stick and was pointing it at Rala. She felt like charging at him and tearing out his heart for what he had done to her, Rolf, and Talon, but something commanded her to do the opposite, to restrain herself, take cover, and let the hunter go. She complied. She went down on all fours and disappeared into the forest. The hunter lowered his sticks and went on his way, but not alone, for Rala followed him. She surreptitiously dogged his footsteps, never breaking cover. She watched him hunting and studied the way he handled his sticks. She became his shadow, his secret alter ego. She discovered how he lived, how he ate, when he took the sticks with him and when he left them behind. And one day, when she thought she knew all there was to know about the hunter, she confronted him. He had laid aside his clothes and sticks and was swimming in the river. He took fright when he spotted Rala on the bank because he realized that his time had come. Rala picked up the sticks, took aim at the hunter, and shot him in the heart. His agonized cries filled the forest, and the river turned red. Rala had proved herself an excellent marksman with bow and arrow at the very first attempt. Rala defies death. From that day onwards, Rala enjoyed an unusual relationship with death. She had no fear of it because she had already conquered it once, and now she knew how to visit it on others. She matched herself against opponents whose strength and ability she couldn't gauge, and it was pure luck that she survived such confrontations. She waded through murky swamps pervaded by ominous scents and emerged unscathed because the creatures that inhabited them were too dumbfounded by her show themselves. Audacity to show themselves. She challenged death itself, but neither hunger nor thirst, teeth nor claws could defeat her. Rala had lost her respect not only for death but also for life, because she had no one left worth living for. One evening she picked up a scent that seemed at once familiar and unfamiliar. The wind was strong and blew it away too quickly for her to identify it. In the twilight she spotted a fast-moving creature flitting from tree to tree and realized that she herself was its quarry. She loosed off an arrow, but her pursuer ducked so swiftly that it splintered against a tree trunk. Never having wasted one of her precious arrows before, Rala was annoyed and puzzled at the same time. What sort of creature could it be? She fired 2 arrows simultaneously, a technique that had never failed to kill in the past, but the creature did something more puzzling still. It plucked both arrows out of the air, and adding insult to the injury, hurled them back with such a force that they struck in a tree just in front of Rala's nose. She had never before encountered such an opponent endowed with such reflexes, such strength and speed. Visibility steadily deteriorated as darkness fell. Having fired her last arrow in vain, Rala was left with only one choice: to confront her opponent face to face. They met in a clearing, close enough to look into each other's eyes. The wind dropped at that moment, enabling them to identify each other's scent, and they realized there wouldn't be a fight after all. Their noses had told them they were brother and sister. The river. The gray waters of the Walper swirled around Rumo. They were below him, above him, everywhere. Cold as eyes had forced their way into his mouth, his nose, his ears. A steady roar filled his head. I can't swim, he thought. What? Said Dandelion. You can't swim and you jump into a raging river? And you reproach me for it. Where's Rala? Rala? Who's Rala? She'll die. Who'll die? You will, that's for sure. Maybe Rala mustn't start swimming. I can't swim. Then do something about it, Dandelion yelled. Swim. Rala, thought Rumo. Rumo, Dandelion yelled. Get moving. You've got to swim. But Rumo didn't answer. Rolf and Rolla of the Forest. After their reunion in the forest, Rolf and Rolla roamed the wild woods of Zamonia together. For a time they worked as guard dogs on a fruit farm that was regularly raided by thieves. The farm hands taught them to speak, and the thieves stopped raiding the orchards at night, deterred by the Wolpertine's ferocious barking. They moved on when the harvest was over. At some stage, when they reached the south of the Zamodian continent, Rolf started talking about a silver thread he could see with his eyes shut. As time went by, Rolla realized that his vision meant a lot to him, so they journeyed on in search of its source and eventually came to Wolperton City. They registered with the mayor, moved into a little house together, and went to school. Rolf found his silver thread in the shape of a girl Wolpertine named Mara of the Mists. In other respects, they led a normal life devoid of undue excitement, until Rumo appeared on the scene. Rolla was puzzled by the emotions that gripped her when the stranger blundered into the classroom. He behaved like an utter fool, asked stupid questions in class, and tangled with Rolf, of all people. Above all, he treated her as if she were a block of wood. So why did she have these feelings for him? She was Rolla of the Forest, the proudest, most high-spirited girl in Wolperting in the city, with a host of admirers, but now this Rumo had come along and turned her world upside down. What gave him the right? He avoided her eye and company, gave her the widest possible berth in the playground, and responded to her smiles with a low growl. Indeed, he seemed positively to detest her. At the fair, he'd almost fainted at the mere touch of her. What an idiot! And this was what perplexed her most of all. Rolla could think of nothing and no one but Rumo. She wanted to live with him, grow old with him, die and dissolve into the cosmos with him, when the world disintegrated. She thought of him at night, too. She'd always had wild and wonderful dreams, usually of Talon and their hunting trips in the forest, but Rumo now haunted her nocturnal world and behaved little less strangely there than in real life. One night Rolla dreamed again of Talon the Claw. It was a very remarkable dream because Talon could speak. He was sitting on a log with a fatal arrow lodged in his heart. "Listen, my girl," he said, "and listen carefully, because in life I was never able to say anything except your name, but now I'm dead, and I can tell you this. Everything has changed. This Rumo, this idiot who keeps blundering through our lovely dreams, I wondered what he was doing in our forest, so I asked him. Well, asked isn't the word. I had to torment him a little to get at the truth, but at last I wrung it out of him. Sit tight and listen to this. He's crazy about you, hopelessly infatuated. He doesn't dare tell you, so his spirit goes wandering when he's asleep at night and insinuates itself into your dreams. Have you ever heard of such idiocy?" Talon slid off the log to the ground and lay there, looking just as he had when he was dying. "Listen, Rolla," he went on in a tremulous whisper. "I couldn't utter any dramatic last words when I was close to death, but now that I can speak I'd like to make up for lost time." His voice became even fainter. "I'm only a stupid bear, and I don't know the first thing about such matters. But if you want my opinion, you must take the initiative. You must hunt him down and lay low." Talon gave a final groan, and his head sagged. Rolla awoke in tears. Although she didn't believe in dream messages, she was obsessed from then on with a single thought. How could she lay Rumo low? And then she'd seen him making for the bridge over the Whooper. Rumo hadn't spotted her. He looked moody and ill-tempered. In fact, he was talking to himself. If Rolla followed hard on his heels, stalking him the way she used to stalk game in the forest and flitting from piece of cover to the next, when she saw that he meant to cross the bridge, a plan took shape in her mind. A dangerous, extremely risky plan, but she felt it was time to give death another chance. Her idea of how to put Rumo's love to the test was not only simple but harebrained. She would throw herself into the Whooper. If he jumped in after her, if he risked certain death for her sake, she could be sure of his love. She spared no thought for what would happen afterwards, or how the two of them would extricate themselves from the raging torrent. That didn't enter into her plan. After all, danger was an integral part of it. The colors of death. Unlike the monocles, Wolpertines didn't believe that they would rise into the clouds after death. They believed that death would spell total inactivity. Although aware that they would inevitably die someday, they didn't speculate on what would happen thereafter. Rumo was doubly surprised, therefore, when he lost consciousness and found himself in a world that seemed familiar to him. It was a vast panorama of luminous shapes, a hitherto unknown colors and endless streamers of light, which reminded him of the world of his inner eye. Aha, he thought. So this is what it's like when you're dead. It's like seeing things with your eyes shut. He was being swept along by a river of pulsating radiance. The color of the river, it suddenly occurred to him, was Zolb, and gaumish clouds were racing across the Zabrine sky overhead. Amazingly enough, he knew all the names of these peculiar colors by heart. He could swim, what was more. No, he himself wasn't swimming, he was being borne along by this river, which shared none of the unpleasant characteristics of the Whooper. It wasn't noisy but quiet, not cold but warm, not turbulent but calm. I'll simply go with the flow, he thought. Everything had suddenly become so easy and simple and lovely, so painless and unproblematical. He was no longer plagued by anger and doubt, by fear and torments of love. Fighting the water. When Rolla dived into the Whooper, the first thing she noticed was that the water was apparently colder and flowing considerably faster than she'd expected. Above all, it was heavy. It soaked into her clothes and hair, seeped into her boots, and dragged her down into the depths. Last but not least, it was noisy. Its monotonous roar drowned every other sound and thwarted her romantic plan to cry for help. Having pictured herself drifting serenely along like a beautiful victim of drowning, she was now being swept away and submerged like a scrap of paper. She had already drifted under Woolper Bridge without managing to attract Rumo's attention when he happened to look over the parapet, just as violent eddy carried her briefly to the surface. Rumo dived in without a moment's hesitation. Rolla saw him plunge into the river before she herself was swept away by the current. He loves me, she thought. He followed me to certain death without a second thought. Surfacing for a moment, she saw Rumo too break surface. His body was inert. Whirled around by the current, he was making no attempt to hold his own against it. It was clear that he'd lost consciousness. Rumo is drowning, she thought. They continued to drift along in the middle of the river. It hadn't occurred to Rolla that Rumo would lose consciousness, that the current would be so overwhelmingly powerful, and that fate would this time treat her with such indifference. She cursed herself for having devised a childish romantic scheme that had put Rumo in the direst danger. Rumo, whose life was more precious to her than her own. You must try to swim, someone shouted. A number of Wolpertings had gathered at the river's edge. They were leaning over the embankment, or keeping pace with the raging torrent, by running along it in great agitation. Swim? What nonsense! Rolla couldn't swim. No Wolperting could. It was just about as unthinkable as learning to fly by jumping over a precipice. Tried to swim. Another Wolperting shouted from the bank. Why was it so unthinkable? Rumo's life was at stake, not to mention her own, so why should she let this atavistic fear of water prevent her from at least giving it a try? You must swim. But how did swimming go? Rolla remembered the hunter she'd watched swimming in the river before she killed him. He had stretched out his arms and shoveled the water behind him, and the movement of his legs had reminded her of a frog. She was dragged under again. Pebbles and dead branches smote her in the face, and once she hit her head so hard on a massive rock that it almost knocked her out. When she finally regained the surface, she saw Rumo floating along nearby, but upside down. All that protruded from the water was one of his boots. The Wolpertings on the bank were brandishing long sticks and coils of rope. By now, Rala and Rumo were nearing the outskirts of the city where the current was not quite as strong and the river was unenclosed by an embankment. Their agitated fellow citizens had ventured unusually close to the water's edge, trying to keep her head above the surface. Rala extended her arms, shoveled the water behind her, and simultaneously imitated the leg movements of a frog. Sure enough, she made a little progress in Rumo's direction. She repeated her movements with all the strength and speed of which a Wolperting was capable again and again. To her astonishment, she noticed that the river was losing its power over her body. She herself determined whether her head was above or below the surface when she drew breath and when she submerged. So that's how you swim, she thought. You fight the water. She had already grasped Rumo's boot. She continued to paddle with one paw, and her powerful strokes brought her closer to the bank, where the spectators were trailing long branches in the water and holding out their arms. At last she managed to seize the shaft of a pitchfork. Hauled ashore, she dragged Rumo's inert body out of the water. Rumo, feeling detached and remote from everything, was drifting along on the silent billows of death. Would he continue to drift like this forevermore? He didn't care. He would accept whatever happened, because anyone who had accepted death was past being afraid of dying. Being afraid of anything. He looked up at the sky with all of its weird and wonderful new colors, kelf, chromium, open, glab, evolent, and suddenly a familiar color, silver. Yes, the silver thread was quivering overhead, near enough to touch. It had a voice, as it did in his dreams, but it wasn't singing this time, it was speaking firmly and loudly. Rumo, you've got to breathe. Breathe? Why should he have to breathe now, you said? He'd just broken the habit. Rumo, the voice said again, breathe, you've got to. I can't breathe anymore, he thought. I've forgotten how. Rumo, cried the voice angrily now. I order you to breathe. Rumo felt a sudden sharp pain in his nose. Ouch! A pain like that didn't belong in this peaceful new world of his. Rumo's eyes filled with tears. He uttered a sob and started to breathe. He opened his eyes. Someone was bending over him. He blinked. Then he saw it was Rala. Several other Wolpertings were crowding around behind her. She punched him on the nose, said someone. It worked, though. Incredible! He's alive! Rala can swim, said someone further away. Rala mopped Rumo's face and looked at him as if she expected him to say something special. He stared back uncomprehendingly, then he vomited into her lap. The talk of the town. Rala can swim! The news spread through Wolverine with the rapidity of a forest fire. It traveled from house to house, street to street, district to district, until within the space of an afternoon the whole city knew it. Rala can swim. The inhabitants were no less dumbfounded by the news than they would have been if told that Rala could fly. None of them would ever have thought it possible that one of their number could learn to swim. Swimming, if performed by Wolperton, verged on sorcery. Where Rumo was concerned, the news had an unpleasant postscript. In full, it ran, Rala can swim, and Rumo is a stupid idiot for falling into the Whooper and having to be fished out by a girl. Nobody mentioned that he had thrown himself into the river to rescue Rala, or described how she had really got there. No, the false version of the story was recounted again and again until everyone believed it. That, at all events, was the state of affairs as reported by Ernst to Rumo while he lay face down on his bed, vomited brown Vulpur water into a bucket. Rumo continued to be dependent on Ernst's information for the next few days. He was feeling so groggy that he hardly left his room for a week. While he was slowly recovering, Rala's reputation enjoyed a meteoric rise. The streets of Wolperting rang with her name. Rala, the swimmer. Rala, the wonder girl. Rala, who can walk on water. Rala, fearless savior of a moronic non-swimmer. And so forth. It was almost too much to bear. Rumo felt it might have been better if he'd remained in that multicolored, luminous limbo and gone on drifting forever. He would then have been spared the items of news brought him during the convalescence by Urs, Axel, and two other triplets that the municipal theater's amateur players were rehearsing a drama entitled Rumo's Rescue, that the city hall authorities were thinking of erecting a monument renaming the river in Rolla's honor, and that she was giving swimming lessons in the ponds outside the city walls, her example having shown that overcoming your deep-seated fear of water and learning a few simple movements were all you needed to do in order to be able to swim. Even when Rumo was back on his legs, he scarcely dared to leave his room. He no longer went to school, shirked his civic duties, and avoided the cabinet maker's workshop for days. He slunk through the side streets at night for a breath of fresh air, but that was all. The whole city was in league against him. Ushan de Luca lay in wait for him in fencing lessons and Rolla in class, and he could well imagine how Roll, Fasco, and the others would taunt him. On one of his solitary nocturnal walks he came to Black Dome Square. The great building stood there, its dark bulk gleaming in the moonlight like a memorial to all the world's unsolved mysteries. Rumo went over, leant his back against the cold surface, and looked up at the stars. The sleeping city was utterly silent. This, he thought, would be the ideal moment to steal away and shake the dust off his heels. The whole city loved Rala, so why was she unhappy? Because even though Rumo owed her his life, he was still behaving like an idiot. It was incredible. Hardly had she hauled him out of the raging river and summoned him back to life when he opened his eyes, puked all over her trousers, stood up, and walked off without a word of thanks. What ought she to have done? Confess her love in front of everyone? No thanks. She would sooner enjoy a bit of hero worship. Rolla can swim. It sounded good, she thought. Better, anyway, than Rolla can knit. They had feted her in the streets all day long, and the mayor had given a banquet in her honor that night. The following day half Wolperting had begged her for swimming lessons. It was a duty she couldn't evade. She began by giving lessons to a number of physical training instructors, and helped them to select their most promising pupils. Within a few days almost everyone in Wolperting could swim, apart from a few chronically hydrophobic individuals and Rumo. Where he was concerned, Rolla could afford to bide her time. She had her hands full at present, and Rumo couldn't hide himself away forever. He would reappear at school sooner or later, and then she would resume the hunt, dog his footsteps, and finally lay him low. She had sworn it by the name of Talon. All in good time, though. First, she would savor her fame a little longer. After all, she was the very first heroine Wolperting had produced. She couldn't believe that her life would have any greater excitements to offer. I think I want to come back in a few hours and read some more. Goodbye for now.